Welcome to High Side, Low Side, episode 10, a very special episode indeed. Zach and I sat down and we talked with our dads in honor of Father's Day coming up. We are also going to discuss electric motorcycle companies filing for bankruptcy, as well as how to get into motorcycle racing. But before we do any of that, we need a word from our sponsors.
That's right. Motul is a steadfast sponsor of High Side, Low Side, as you all know. And as you might know, I like to call out individual products that I think might speak to our audience. Was cruising the catalog over at RevZilla.com/Motul the other day, and I noticed that there is DCT-specific transmission fluid from Motul. All you dual clutch transmission owners out there, we want you to know that Motul has your back, just like it has High Side, Low Side's back. So to shop all of Motul's products, go to RevZilla.com/Motul. That's RevZilla.com/MOTUL.
Now, while you're over there on RevZilla.com, you can make sure you check out QuadLock phone mounts as well. QuadLock is the newest sponsor of the High Side, Low Side podcast, and we've talked a lot about how their anti-vibration dampers keep your phone safe, but did you know that they have got plenty of wireless charging mount options as well? So when you get to where you're going, your phone is already charged, and you can take all those photos knowing that your camera is going to work well. You can take phone calls from long road trips hooked to your comm systems because your phone's battery is going to be charged because QuadLock has your back. You can learn more over at quadlockcase.com, and you can shop the entire collection of QuadLock cases at RevZilla.com/quad-lock. Now, while you're over there on RevZilla.com, you want to make sure that you're riding safe. You want to make sure that your father or your mother or your sister is riding safe. This is a Father's Day episode. So one of the considerations you can make for dear old dad this riding season is an airbag. You know, there's a lot of new safety technology out there, and airbags are leading the charge. And if you want to learn more about what an airbag can do for you and how an airbag can save, you can head over to RevZilla.com/airbags for all of the information on the newest safety technology available. Now, on with the show.
Okie doke, High Side, Low Side fans. Here we go. We're off to the races in yet another episode. The not the news topic this time around, Mr. Spurgeon Dunbar, has to do with electric motorcycles. Now, motorcyclists, pure traditional motorcyclists, as we might refer to ourselves, love to hate electric motorcycles. Would you say that's accurate?
I think that there is some resentment and emotion toward electric motorcycles at times.
Yeah. So this topic spurred from an article that our colleague Dustin Whelan wrote for the Common Tread blog called "Electric Motorcycles Startups File for Bankruptcy as Investment Dries Up." It is a quick documentation of the struggles that some electric motorcycle companies, have been having recently. I just feel like before we start the timer here, what I would like the discussion to be is, I guess, first of all, an explanation of what's going on here, but also then, are we happy about this, or are we sad that motorcycles that we historically have not liked are struggling?
I feel like the question you really should be asking yourself is, are you surprised? Okay. And with that, let's go ahead and start the timer. I used the term resentment a moment ago, and I think that kind of is a bit harsh, but I think, we've had conversations with people on the podcast, Mr. Fagan, who, talks about emotions in the UK borderlining on, rage for electric motorcycles. I think really what I got out of this story was the fact that I'm not surprised. It seems like these companies that were specifically talked about were taking a lot of investment money and not turning around a viable product that was selling. Right.
And to be clear, the article that our friend Dustin wrote covers specifically Cake motorcycles, or the company Cake anyway. A company called Arc, which came out which debuted a bike called the Vector, and then Livewire. And
Arc got a lot of critique around their bikes being expensive.
Yes.
Their bikes came out at like 15,000, 16,000, which is nothing compared to the Arc bikes, which were
so you mean Livewire?
Livewire
got static for bikes being expensive.
No. Cake.
There we go.
When the Cake bikes came out, when the Cake bikes came out, they were, $15,000, and people were upset about that. And then when the Arc bike, if you look at the price there, it was north of six figures, and then Livewire is expensive as well, but the new Del Mar is more affordable, supposedly.
It is, and arguably more of a real motorcycle than the Cake options, which are sort of like really beefy motorcycles. I'm sorry, bicycles.
It's kind of like a cross between a bicycle and a dirt bike.
And not that they're not cool,
photos.
in some respect, but I guess to dig down for my question really quick here, do you have a sort of like a little bit of an "I told you so" swell inside you when you hear that, like these bikes? Like I've ridden a Cake, not all of them, but I've ridden one or two of the models. I've never ridden an Arc, but I've ridden a number of electric motorcycles from a number of different companies, and in some way or another, they often leave you feeling a little bit flat, or at least a little bit different than riding a conventional motorcycle, which is sort of what we all love to do. Is there any part of you that sees this and thinks like, yeah, that kind of makes sense, that trying to break into this market that's based on a foundation of sort of passion and interest in a specific pastime and is delivering something that's not quite that pastime, these products are struggling?
I don't wish that anyone fails. I think that, rising tides lift all boats, and that if there could have been some success here, I think it would have helped the motorcycle industry in general, which is struggling from a sales standpoint. But I'm not surprised. Like, I mean, I remember when alarm's going off. When I rode the Cake the first time, I was like, I just can't imagine spending, $13,000-$14,000 on this. It just seemed very inadequate to match that price tag. But then again, we're living in a world where, mountain bikes are north of 10 grand, dirt bikes are north of 10 grand. So it seems like the person interested in this might be willing to pay that kind of money. But I think what we're forgetting here is that people buying a mountain bike are a very specific set of people. People buying a motorcycle, very specific set of people. And it seems like some of these manufacturers, Cake specifically, is trying to mesh the world in between. I think with Harley Davidson and Livewire, that's probably one of the more successful options that we're discussing here today. But even from that standpoint, they were trying to sell 15,000 motorcycles in 24, and now they're projecting that they're not even going to hit 1,500 motorcycles sold. So it just doesn't seem like there's a demand there for this. And I think some of that just comes back to the infrastructure, which you and I have talked about in the podcast before.
Yeah, I wonder. I think it's more of...
What do you feel? Do you feel more like you're ready to point the finger and said, I told you this wasn't going to work?
I don't. I'm very pro two-wheeled vehicle kind of in general, and I don't have any of that. I don't have any of that sort of like, electric motorcycles are failing. I knew this would happen. They deserve to fail. That's not how I feel at all. I would like them to succeed, and I think they are cool, and I think they are fun, and I think two-wheel vehicles in general are playthings, whether it's a mountain bike or a motorcycle or whatever. So, like, if it's expensive, if it is an expensive plaything, we're already doing that. People are already buying $30,000 road glides and $10,000 bicycles. So, like, why is anyone pointing a finger at anyone else?
The one final note here to consider, and Dustin actually included this at the bottom of his article, was at Hollywood Electrics, which was one of the first dedicated electric motorcycle dealerships in the country, is going out of business as well. So it's not just that some of the investment money has dried up, but some of the more established, they were a Zero motorcycle dealer, I think the nation's first, and they've been around since 2009, I believe, and they're going out of business.
Well, our timer has long since expired, but for more information on this, you can, of course, go over to RevZilla.com/common-tread and find Dustin's article titled, I say again, Electric Motorcycle Startups File for Bankruptcy as Investments Dries Up. And yeah, I think that you will learn more reading that article, and I think it's interesting research that he did. And as usual, we would encourage you to make your own judgment and not listen to us too much.
But since you're here already, and this is the choice you've made, you're going to get to listen to us, but a little bit separately, a little bit differently this time, because this episode, we sat down with our respective fathers, and we had, I would dare say, intimate, private conversations.
Perhaps, yes.
Where we got a chance to, put a microphone in front of our dads and have a conversation about parenting, motorcycling, and a little bit of the in-between, I suppose.
Yeah, we get a fair number of questions actually emailed to us about how we ended up on motorcycles and how our parents accepted that and how they encouraged it or how they didn't encourage it and how our families felt and how many of you high side, low side listeners have said you like the idea of having a motorcycle or you do have a motorcycle, but your family doesn't agree with it. And how do you have those conversations? And so rather than try to cover those topics really broadly and pass judgment on how we think other people should conduct themselves in their own lives, we tried to reflect on our own path to where we are today. And obviously Spurgeon and I are very sort of into motorcycles, I guess you could say, and our dads are as well. But that doesn't mean the road to get there hasn't been full of decisions and conversations that have maybe been difficult. So we decided to ask our dads about this and what their perspective is on being a child with a motorcycle at one point and then being a parent with motorcycles at the next stage in their life. And hopefully it offers some sort of, I don't know, at least entertainment, but maybe even some inspiration or guidance in your own life.
Yeah, and I think part of what Zach and I were searching for too, and we talk about this a little bit with our dads is, Zach recently became a father. I am soon to be a father myself, and I think we were trying to, at least I'm not going to speak for you, Zach, but I think I was trying to get a little bit of perspective as to what was going through my dad's head with some of the decisions that he made with me and my brothers and I as we were growing up, and it was interesting to hear his thoughts and his perspective on it in a way that maybe I haven't heard before because I haven't asked so directly. And I think it was interesting to hear the conversation that you had with your dad, and I think that's where we're going to start today.
Yes, indeed. So without further ado, to celebrate Father's Day, we'll start with an interview with my father, Tim Kortz, who is not the biggest fan of technology, let's just say. And that is where the conversation starts. Now that you are plugged into the Matrix, do you feel more attached to the internet than you normally do now? But
I feel in the cloud. In fact, I'm very cloudy.
Very cloudy. Perfect. Okay, so you, Tim Kortz, are a motorcycling veteran of many decades now, right? You've probably like coming up on 50 years or something like that. You've ridden in places around the world. You've ridden to Central America. You've ridden in Europe. You've ridden on racetracks. You've ridden on dirt roads. You've ridden with friends. You've ridden without friends. And I guess where I want to start is at the beginning of your motorcycling journey to some extent, because being that this is the Father's Day episode, any motorcyclist out there has had some interaction with their parents or their guardian, usually, or at least their family, about riding motorcycles. And I'm curious what I don't actually remember, you've told me this, I think, probably over the years, but what was the beginning of your motorcycling life like? And what did your parents think?
I didn't get a lot of pushback from the family. I don't think they really objected, and I'm not sure why, because they're pretty conservative in a lot of other, in terms of safety and stuff like that.
Right.
But my father had a friend who lived up here in Vermont, and we visited a few times, and it was he was an interesting man, an inventor, and he and his wife lived in Pittsfield, not far from here, up a 4-mile driveway, as I recall. Now, I was, an adolescent at that time, so, and I can't remember yesterday, so, I could be wrong. But he had a lot of fun equipment, and it was just a fun place to be. One of the things he had was a little Trail 90, much as you guys took much as Airy took up to Prudhoe Bay. And he let me ride it up and down the driveway, and boy, it was a blast. I got it all covered with mud, and I washed it all off. I had fun washing it. I had fun, and finally my father said, "Okay, come on, you've been doing it all day. That's a little too much." And probably he was right. But anyway, he seemed to encourage me. And then years later, the first bike I ever had.
Sorry to interrupt you, but that was how old? You said adolescent. So you're
I'm
12,
pretty sure I was
13
13. So I'm pushing 60 years here. Not quite.
Yeah. All right.
Since my first ride.
Right.
And then a few years later, he actually had a Vespa, a nice one, a 150, in a beautiful blue color, and he rode it for a while, but he was disenchanted with it. You have to bring stuff, and that didn't work out all that well. And he didn't love it, so he sold it to me, $75, I think, and I rode it all that year and quite a bit of the next, and it completely ruined it. I mean, you couldn't kill it. It ran. It always ran, but I just dented every panel and, cut the fenders down and kind of chopped it. I mean, it's just awful. I wish I had it.
I see. So when you say you ruined it, you treated it poorly to some extent, but also you modified it and you did things intentionally to it that comprehensively ruined it.
Right. I purposely ruined it. Yeah. I can't imagine what I was thinking, but I was young, what can you do?
Sure. So, and sorry, this is like high school age, I feel like. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, I think you could get a learner's permit at 16.
Yeah. Okay.
And it took me a while to get my driving license. They didn't want me to. They had requirements that eventually they dropped.
You mean your parents did?
My parents did, yeah. They
I see.
told, well, if you don't do blah, 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 you can't have your license. So I didn't get it until I was, 17 or something like that.
Okay.
18,
gotcha.
You can just do it. You can just do it yourself. So,
right. So I never actually thought about this because you've told me about the Vespa before, but I never really thought about this. But your dad, because you and your dad are pretty different sensibilities over the course of your life. I think that's safe to say. But it's interesting that he was not discouraging about the motorcycling thing, for one. And do you think part of that was, I mean, he was an immigrant, right? He was born in Europe and came to the U.S. after World War II. And do you think that there's some, do you think it was American culture then to be like, I'll have a Vespa and my kid can ride it, I don't care? Or do you think that was kind of an international, like a little bit more of a European thing, like attitude that he had? Or
yeah, it's a good question. He loved the Vespa, which I agree completely. It's a beautiful machine. It was exactly right for where it came in history after World War II, and it was very like him. It was quiet and smooth, and we called it the electric chair. My friends they were getting motorcycles, Honda 350s and Jawa 350s and stuff like that, and of course, we all wanted Harley Davidsons. That's what we had in mind. And
okay.
I mean, I think maybe he was just relieved that I wasn't as bad as sometimes I seemed. I mean, I wasn't a very successful child. I did a lot of things to disappoint my parents, and so that wasn't so disappointing. A Vespa, it's a nice it's electric chair. It's nice, I mean, I had, I had posters of Hell's Angels on the walls of my bedroom, which is, again, if you think it's pretty stupid to modify a Vespa, well, that's even stupider. So I think, in contrast to that, the Vespa sounded like kind of nice. I had a little white, Buco helmet, half helmet that I wore around. I crashed it, I don't know how many times.
To keep driving at your the sort of relationship with motorcycling and your parents or your family, do you think it evolved ever? Like, did your family, your two sisters and your parents, do you think that ever changed over time? You riding motorcycles, did it ever switch to being sort of like them being proud of it, or did they always kind of think, oh, he's a scofflaw, or your sisters just sort of made fun of you and your parents thought it was silly? Because ultimately it has become a pretty big part of your life, right? I mean, we motorcyclists sometimes I think struggle with the motorcycling defining us. Like if you're the person in your group of friends who rides motorcycles, then that's like that's all anyone knows about you, right? I guess I'm curious if you think your motorcycling life evolved in that way with your family at all.
I'm not sure it really had to evolve. Actually, my sister had a motorcycle before I did. My two sisters are older, and
right.
So one of them had a Yamaha 250, which she wasn't successful with, but it laid around the house for a while. I didn't manage to steal it, which is fortunate. And I just think they sort of saw it as a vehicle, and they saw it sort of as I do. I mean, it's really, what are those covers? I bought covers for the bike, and I forget what brand they are, but they say on the outside when you cover up your bike, it says it's not just a motorcycle. And I think, yeah, it is. It's just a motorcycle. It's not a lifestyle. It's not a comment on anything. It's just,
Right.
sometimes you want two wheels. I mean, I drive around on four wheels a lot more than I drive on two wheels. And
Right.
some works a lot better most of the time, but I like two wheels. And you're right. It's a big part of my life. Maybe they saw it as a limitation, that I was sort of, monocultural in that way, right? I didn't do anything else. It was fun listening to Spurgeon talk to Peter Egan about guitars, and I'm sure that because I know, I've read a lot of Egan's stuff, and he's into planes, and he's into cars, and he's into travel, and he's into history, and and I don't do much of that stuff. I mean, I like hearing a little bit about it, but so maybe they just saw it as like, oh well, that's really all he wants to do, and sure enough, it is pretty much all I want to do. So
it's a good point, though, and I think that again, perhaps even a whole nother podcast about the
sure,
the
we'll
other
just do it
things
every week
that motorcyclists do. Yeah, well, we need topics here, but it is interesting, though. Yeah, I think that it does defy, especially like Spurge or Airy, myself. It's our job, and it's our job to be like present in the motorcycling world with YouTube videos and podcasts and stuff about motorcycles. And it's like it does feel like a lifestyle from the outside looking in. But if you know Spurgeon, you know that he likes guitars, and if you know Airy, he likes woodworking, and if you know me, I like playing soccer and playing golf and like doing other stuff. It's not the necessarily the thing that I do or think about every waking minute anymore. Anyway, I'd like to pivot into your fatherhood, and I'm curious if you remember me as a baby or a toddler or a young, before I rode motorcycles, and thinking about me riding motorcycles, and if you remember any of those thoughts. Like, were you conflicted? Do you remember having questions about whether or not you would let me do it, or there were the influences in your life that suggested that I shouldn't, like friends or cousins, or I don't know. Was there ever any question that I would do it?
Well, I always wondered, what you would do. I mean, when you have a little baby, you think, well, I wonder how he's going to turn out. I wonder what he's going to be into. And you try to think, well, maybe he'll be into something I don't know anything about. Maybe he'll be ballet or Civil War reenactments, and I'll have to figure that out. I'll have to learn about that stuff because, that's what fathers do. Right. But in my case, I didn't have to do any of that because all you wanted to do was the same stuff I was already doing. So it was dead easy. Maybe I don't. You get lucky no matter what. I mean, I would have been lucky anyway to be a father and to be your father, but it sure made it easy. And I don't think I got a lot of pushback. I don't think you remember the first rides that you took because you were tiny, and. You know how my bikes always go. There's this big tank bag on the tank, and then there's the seat, and then so you can put a 1-year-old on there with a little bicycle helmet on and some gloves and just ride it around. And I'm sure you had a lot of rides before you were 3. And then and there was a gap. You got too big at 5 or something, so I couldn't see over you anymore. Mm-hmm. And you were too young to stay awake on the back. And so that was a little gap. But you remember like riding down to Sandy's with Tom and getting a hot dog and looking at the river and stuff.
Sure.
So I don't think your mom ever objected or, I mean, maybe there was a comment now and then, but I think it was just a given.
Because it was part of your life, and it was part of you and my mom were riding motorcycles together, and so people were just sort of like, well, I don't know, he's their kid, so I guess he'll be on a motorcycle, and that they didn't like, that was the attitude. Yeah,
and I don't know what they thought to themselves. I mean, it is needlessly risky. Let's face it. I mean, it's not It's not as good as, of course, car seats weren't what they are today, but now, boy, you could. You could roll a car over several times and your kid would be okay, so I don't know. I'm astonished by it. But anyway.
So in other words, the risk of putting a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old or a 9-year-old on a motorcycle as a passenger to ride around was arguably not as risky, sort of like comparative in juxtaposition to the safety of cars, because the car situation wasn't as safe.
Right.
That's kind of what you're saying.
It must have been even truer in my youth, which I didn't get into because we didn't know anybody that had a motorcycle.
Right.
I think by the time you came along, also motorbikes had begun to be better received than they were in my day. You know, they were a sort of a countercultural statement when I was a kid.
Right.
You know, not Vespas. That was one nice thing about the Vespa was it was like you're obviously not going to join the Hells Angels.
There's a story you tell occasionally about when around the time that I was too big to sit in front of you, but I would sit on the back, but I wasn't old enough to really do a good job sitting on the back. And we were coming home that time and I fell asleep as we were going up the driveway. You remember that?
Yeah. Fortunately, the driveway was just awful. We had just moved up there that year and the driveway wasn't finished. So it was down to walking speed when I heard your helmet hit the rocks. And no harm done, you know. But out on the freeway, it would have been a different thing, I guess. So.
Sure. So I guess my question in that, scenario is like, we can laugh about it now. And I think, I remember you laughing about it soon after it was clear that I was okay. But there was probably a moment there where you thought, this isn't a great look for a dad to drop his kid off the back of a motorcycle onto his head, right?
Fortunately, nobody looking, but yeah.
Sure. It was a nice rural Vermont road, so no one could see. But yeah, did you, was that sort of like a little face of risk poking its head out as you expect to see with motorcycles? Or did you ever have a moment where you were like, geez, maybe I shouldn't be putting my kid on a motorcycle? I don't know.
Well, I did think that. And I thought about like strapping it together and which if you had to do it, if you lived if you didn't have a car and you had to get your kid to school and he's 5 years old, you'd put a belt around both of you somehow. Maybe it was you guys. Was it RevZilla that had a video about a woman who said she gets grief from her friends because she rides her kid to school. And she's like, well, I ride a motorcycle. My kid rides on the back. And I think they had a rigging. Or anyway, somewhere I saw a special belt, like a harness that the mom wore. And it went around the little girl, the little, whatever, 6, 8, 9-year-old girl. And that's a mixed blessing because then if you fall off, a kid's a lot better without a 150-pound grown-up whamming into them, But I don't know. There again, it's everybody got their risk level. Yeah. And you make it up. And in the event, I don't think you got hurt with all the little dirt bikes and clowning around in the yard that we had. I don't think you got hurt till the track, really.
Yeah. I think I hurt myself more on bicycles than on the motorcycles.
As you should. I think that was important. And I really felt that way. I really felt like kids start too early. And I, we couldn't get some of the nice little bikes, these tiny little
What do you mean kids start too early?
I think kids should be on bicycles. I think you should learn to ride a bicycle. I think you should stay fit. I think you should have fun on a bicycle. You've had a lot of fun on bicycles. And by the time, I think we got a little Suzuki, right? A little RM80 when you were maybe 8. And that was kind of too early and also the wrong bike. It was on the way to work, so I bought it. And then you weren't all that enthusiastic, and it was full of surprises. It had a very steep power band.
It did, yeah. It was not an easy bike to control. I actually wrote an article about this for Common Tread, which I think you've read, about how that bike bit me a few times, and then you thought, maybe that's the wrong bike for my kid, and you got me something different.
Yeah, and also that was a couple of years later. I think maybe you were 10. We got the miraculous XR80 that is like one of the world's best bikes ever. Absolutely bulletproof bike.
Yeah, it's still around, isn't it? Don't you have it?
Still around. It's still over at Antoine's, and it still runs.
Everybody has it. Yeah. Okay. So, well, yeah. So I guess that's an interesting point that you make. So was that an intentional thing then that you started me on a motorcycle at say 8 years of age instead of starting me at 5 or 3 or something when you could have gotten an even smaller bike? Like, did you think then it was better that I spend time on a bicycle and sort of learn the fluency of a two-wheeled vehicle before I had an engine?
Yes, I did think that.
Okay.
But I think probably the Suzuki was just serendipitous. It was on the way to work and I saw it for a few days and I thought, geez, $500, why not? So Yeah, so a little bit of a mix, but I do think that, you got into athletics pretty early, and some of it was bicycles, some of it was that. And, yeah, it was baseball and soccer too, but
Right.
they all overlap. And being fit and coordinated and, and it was one of the things I wanted to not miss talking about today is the joy of watching your child do something better than you do. Better. So something like, I taught you how to ride a bike. I taught you how to do a wheelie.
Right.
And then sometime later, not very long later, you were doing wheelies that I couldn't dream of. I couldn't do that. I got such a bang out of it. I thought that this is just the best, and bicycles are wonderful. They're, to think you could put a kid on nowadays you could put a 3-year-old on a little electric thingy and they can ride around and they could become quite good at it. And maybe that's how you get to be world champion. I don't know. But I don't know. There's something about bicycles. There's something about the coordination of moving, making that circle with your feet and understanding the power of it and your own body, your own legs. I don't know. I think it's important to do that.
Yeah.
So, and I think it was important for you anyway.
Right. I never knew that you, that you had that feeling when I was, because I think about it sometimes, and lots of, I have friends and, peers, whatever, that started riding a motorcycle when they were, when they were 3 or 5 or something like that. And I didn't start until I was 8 or 10 or something. I didn't know that was a sort of, maybe not premeditated, but like somewhat intentional thing from you to sort of say like, no, you should, if you're going to crash into something, you should have to create that speed yourself first. And then once you learn how to crash into something, you can then have an engine.
Once you learn to fall off a bicycle, then you can fall off a motorcycle,
Right. And I mean, genuinely, it kind of makes sense. I see, even when I see, whatever, this is again, a whole nother podcast, but I see people riding around on those like electric scooters in the city or even people riding electric bicycles and they're going like 35 miles an hour down a city street. And I think
gloves.
they're wearing a bicycle helmet and they're wearing no glove. They're wearing shorts and a t-shirt. And I often think you clearly haven't hit the ground.
Right.
Like if you had fallen from that speed, you'd probably be a lot more careful because it's really nasty and that's, I think, a good evolution for anyone to have, but especially children, because like that's the time to smack yourself into the ground, right? Is when your bones are soft and you heal like a superhero. Do you remember being, I assume part of watching your kid ride a bicycle and a motorcycle, ultimately take risks, like I build a jump for my bicycle or I, go around a little dirt track in the yard on my motorcycle as fast as I could. And I'm taking these risks, and you probably as a parent, you often, I am not very good at it yet, but I'm hoping to get there. You watch your kid make these decisions and take risks, and you think there's a time to step in and there's a time to not step in. And do you remember watching how I evolved into understanding the risk, or do you did I have to learn some hard lessons that you remember, or do you think that it was I cautious to begin with, or do you remember having to step in or kind of like guide me and to like help me understand stuff like that, or do you think it was natural?
I wonder. I don't know. I'd like to take credit, I guess, but yeah, I actually found your behavior kind of sensible. Like, I remember one time some other kid came over. It wasn't a great friend of yours. I think a son of a friend of Janet's, And so he came over and we had little bicycles and we rode over, next door and through the field and down that long driveway that went over towards Brookfield there.
Right.
And going down the long driveway, that other kid he was your age, which must have been 6 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he was ahead of us. And you could see that he was out of control. He forgot about the brake. He put his feet down, and he went faster and faster and faster with the dust coming off of his feet, and finally landed and did a face plant and it scared the shit out of me because I see him. We pulled down and stopped, and he's getting up and crying, and his mouth is bloody, and it's all full of rocks, and you couldn't tell if they were teeth or rocks or what.
Jesus.
And they weren't teeth, and he wasn't hurt badly, but I thought, you didn't do that stuff. I mean, and I remember later on, I think you must have been older. We took a ride with a bunch of people, John Parker and Joan, and a bunch of other people, and somebody said, "Oh, Zach, he's crazy," and John said, "Oh, he's crazy at all." And I thought that's true. It wasn't crazy. It was cool. It was stunts, wheelies and stoppies and stuff. But it didn't look dangerous to John, and it didn't look dangerous. I mean, of course it's dangerous, but it was sensible. I thought it was done well, and so you had that bone in your head, I think, from the beginning. But I'll take some credit, if you want.
Sure. Yeah, why not? I think you should.
One of the things I had to do was, before we drift away, it was, from first bikes and stuff, was to not be one of those people that force their enthusiasm on a child. That's not, I was determined not to do that. And, like I'm determined with my little grandson now, to not, I'm going to ride him around in the sidecar, probably around the lawn, or,
sure.
And see if he really is enthusiastic. Well, I'll keep doing it because, or, to the limits to which I'm allowed. But, but it's not my intention to get him to do it because I feel like doing it. And I never wanted to do that with you. I hate those baseball dads that sit on the sidelines coaching and telling you what you're doing wrong and how dumb the coach is. And, Jesus, I'm sick of that already. And I didn't want to do that. But the truth is, you just sort of seemed to be into it too. So it was, it was easy,
Maybe it was reverse psychology to some extent, right? You were like, "Oh no, you don't want to ride these motorcycles.
Yeah,
They're no fun.
They suck. You get all wet."
Yeah. No. One of the questions I had written down for you was, do you remember other parents handling their kids' ambitions differently? Do you feel satisfied with kind of like how you measured your encouragement and how you worked through our enthusiasms together? Or did you ever have moments where you thought like, yeah, maybe I shouldn't be exposing him to this or asking him to do this or something?
I don't know. I guess you'd be the one to judge, really. You're the one that had to live with it. I'm judging my own parenting. I think, it's like the old nature versus nurture article, argument. Like, I don't know. It's basically the way it came out. I'm very pleased with the way you came out, and so, I'm not sure how much of it was me or how much it would, if I'd have died in childbirth, maybe you would have come out a lot like you are, and you would have been fine.
I asked you about, did you have questions about letting me ride motorcycles, when I was a little kid, and you were kind of like, you talked about the bicycle thing, which was interesting. But I'm curious if that evolved over time, like eventually you're racing motorcycles and then I want to race motorcycles and you had to face that and you had to let me do it or not let me do it. And the same goes for riding on the street, right? At around the same age, right around 16, I think I started racing. You and I started racing a sidecar together, and then eventually, soon after that, I started racing my own, solo bike. And around the same time, I got my license and started riding on the street. And so, do you remember having an evolution of emotion there, where you thought like, this is another, we're sort of reaping the seeds that we sow here. Where like he now he wants to do this thing, and like riding on the street is a whole nother ball of wax, and it's more dangerous than riding around in the yard. And
Boston
in
worried
Boston.
me.
Okay, yeah.
Because
that was when I was in college.
I knew you could handle the machine. You were really good at cars and bikes both. You were driving around the field at 10. But as soon as you could reach the pedals,
right.
But and then riding. Like. Remember when a couple of times, or I don't know if it was a regular thing, but I remember picking you up at the bus stop down below Lathrop's there.
Yeah.
And on the /5, and you get on in the front, and you're driving, and all I'm doing is the legs, right? So when we, because you couldn't reach the ground, so I'm like, okay, I'll balance, and then you let the clutch out, and I put my feet up, and off we go, and we come around that little corner, and and there was a 10-wheeler coming the other way that had just dumped a load. And and there was no room for that at all. And you just went bang over the end of the bank and laid it into the bank, and we were there and we didn't get hit and it was perfect. And I thought, oh, you know, it looks like he's doing okay. So I wasn't worried about that. But
Right.
Boston, you know, that's not a good place to learn to drive in traffic. And you know, you hadn't had much experience in that way.
Right.
So
Right,
that
right.
worried me a lot, but worked out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess, I mean, the racing thing was a whole other thing, right? Like, you let me race motorcycles. We raced together, like I said, on a sidecar. And you also, you know, encouraged, and I mean, at least encouraged financially. You encouraged me to rate. You allowed me to you paid for my entry fees to race, you know, road race motorcycles. And there were probably times, right? Like I crashed, right? So I'm imagining you now, especially now I'm a parent, and I'm imagining you on the sidelines watching a race, and then like I just don't come around. Those have to be nervy moments, right?
Yeah.
Do you have, was it always just kind of like well, this is what he wants to do and he's old enough to make that decision because he's 16 and not 11? Did you rationalize it that way with the age, or were you just sort of like, was it more primal? Were you thinking like, did you have moments where you thought this was a bad idea?
It's worrisome, you know, when somebody that you love doesn't come around the track. That's very worrisome. We've all done that dozens of
Right.
times.
Right. To each
And
other.
almost always
Yeah.
it works out pretty well. They come back laughing and the handlebar is bent and it's, oh, damn, I screwed up, you know.
Right.
But I remember one, I was watching from 3 there up the hill and I saw you go by under the treehouse there and then dust and you didn't come around 10. And I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
But you were okay. And actually the folks whose bike you wrecked were pretty nice about it too.
They were very nice. Yeah. That was a sad crash. I remember that one quite well.
Yeah. But not too bad. And again, the racetrack that's where you go to not get run over by a Buick. Do you remember, speaking of great parenting moments, do you remember you remember the first time you went faster than me? It was
No. Oh, you mean like when we were both racing RS125 GP bikes?
right. We had the same bike, and our friend Turk had the same bike,
right.
and
Yeah. Okay. And wasn't there we were all in the same race. We're racing against each other.
yep.
I think I remember this now. And so that was the first time I beat you. And wasn't there an oil spill that had been cleaned up or
The
something?
whole
And
track was a mess. I think it was a Sunday, and the whole track there was cement everywhere because people had gotten stuff. So the classic lines that we use, that the old guys used, me and Turk,
Right.
didn't work. And so you had to figure something out, and you figured it out. It was just like another one of those moments where it's like, wow, look at this, look at him go. It was fun. Anyway,
Yeah.
a couple of I mean, I often saw it. You became, a lot faster, right? Like 5 seconds faster or something than I was on those RS125s. But,
Right.
and so over and over again, I felt that. But that day, it was just like, and Turk and I came here, we were laughing, and Turk says, I don't know what he ate this morning, but that was the first time you went faster than us.
In having my son a year and a half ago or so, and diving into parenting, one thing that my wife and I have, I'm not sure if we've echoed this to you, but someone has told us about having a baby, the saying of, you don't know what you're getting when you have a baby, but you do know what you're giving up. So it's easy to say, well, I don't want to have a baby because I know that I won't be able to go out and I won't sleep and it's going to be hard for all these reasons, but you don't know what you're getting from it. And anyone, or most people, a lot of people, a common sentiment in parenting is when you have a baby, you have a child and you start spending time with them, and then you have these moments that are so much fun, and it's so interesting to watch them interact with the world and sort of blossom and turn into people and learn how to talk and learn how to walk and like do this stuff that you're it's just so fascinating, and you have these sort of like waves of emotion that you've never had before, which is really fun. And you can't calculate that before, but what you can calculate is being like, well, I know I'm not going to sleep very well, and I know I'm going to have to wipe poop with my hands more than I already do, which I don't want to do. So I kind of wonder, did you feel that way at all moving into hobbies with me as your son? Sort of like I feel like I know what the risk is. Like racing motorcycles, he can break his leg or worse, and I don't know what we gain from this except what I have gained, which is to have fun and to maybe my motorcycling acumen is higher. Maybe what I'm driving at here is, did I benefit as a person, do you think, aside from being a better motorcyclist? Like, were there benefits to me being a motorcyclist or racing or something that were outside of my motorcycling skill getting better?
Well, there's Airy.
Yeah, right. Friends.
And
That's fair.
And that's, he's a metaphor for all those folks.
Right.
So, because you were such a track rat, every year, all summer, because we don't have winter, of course. I mean, we don't have racing in the winter.
Right.
But
Right.
every summer, you'd get together with not just Airy, but other kids too, Carrie, and those, and the grown-ups that I loved the sort of tribal feel of it, where I remember Janet came down one night, and I was like, I don't know, probably 7 by the time she got down. Maybe it was Saturday night, and she was going to spend the night and be there on Sunday. And you were a little kid somewhere. And she said, well, where's Zach? And I'm like, well, I don't know. He's somewhere. And then you come back and you're all dirty and you're hungry. No, I had, somebody gave me a hot dog, So it was like, felt very tribal. It was a good place to turn you loose, not helicopter.
Right. Yeah.
And fun place to ride the bicycle. And, I don't know. So it worked out. And then I think when you started racing, you're pretty young, still quite a large child, but still a child, and acted childish sometimes, getting pissed off at the wrong people because your bike didn't work well, or because you had forgotten to do something, or you couldn't find your gloves or something, and acting like a jerk, like a 16-year-old, like 16-year-olds act. I mean, I acted like a jerk when I was 16 for sure.
Right.
Having that input from other people now, it's not just me telling you you're a jerk. It's everyone's kind of looking at you like, whoa, he's acting jerky. He's usually such a nice kid. What's going on?
Right.
So I think you learn that way, the same way any kid, in baseball or in debating, whatever
right.
whatever
Civil
your
War
life
reenactments,
is.
maybe.
Yeah, but I thought it was a good environment. I still look back and think that was a good environment to grow up in. I thought it was a good place to be 8 times a year or whatever it was.
Yeah, well, I think that, the sense of community that you feel in a motorcycling group, I think is probably something that, like you said, you can get at, Thursday night softball, or you can get at, whatever, soccer or bingo or stamp collecting or whatever your hobby is. So, it's not that it's unique to motorcycles, but it is something that people really feel, I think, in the motorcycling community. And it makes sense that you as a parent saw that and recognized it as a benefit for your kid. Well, we are just about out of time, sadly, but I do
3
have
minutes
one more.
are up, huh? Yeah.
Exactly. It's been 12 minutes already. Can you imagine? The last word I'd like you to have would be, I feel like you're as willing to be honest with me about parenting as anyone, and I'm curious what your take is on your my son getting into motorcycles or riding things. And over the course of this conversation, you've issued some advice already, which is, bicycles first and to sort of like read the personality of the child to some extent. But yeah, do you have any sort of like final thoughts on what your advice would be for a new parent such as myself with a 1.5-year-old kid, and wanting to encourage it, but not wanting to over encourage it?
I think that's it. I mean, if he drifts into it, then you have the ability already. It would be easy for you to encourage him and enable him if that's what he wants to do. But if he wants to play the piano, then you're going to have to do some learning, and I'm sure you will, because you're a parent, and I hope that I would have. And ideally he'll play the piano and he'll enjoy motorcycles too. And I guess, and strictly in motorcycle terms, well, if you ask me, because of the environment you're in, you can't just do what we did. But there's places to go ride dirt bikes around, and how to do that. And if not, then do what he wants on one Sunday, and then do what you want the next Sunday. I don't know. It's a continuum. You You always have to change the diaper, but you don't have to just do everything a kid wants or always be with them. I think it's disconcerting. A lot of people talk about how involved parents were now. I remember what Ari said about his, I said, something about Todd, and he said, I don't know, he just kind of let us loose.
Right.
It worked out pretty good. So.
You might remember that Peter Egan said something similar about, he was like, I think kids were more feral. They were just kind of like, they just wandered around, and now everything seems like it's so structured, which I'm not sure exactly what that cultural shift has been exactly, but
I hope you can find a place, I don't know, not physically a place, but an environment sort of like we did here in town, because it's a small town. And although you were unfortunately isolated physically, too far to travel by yourself. Right. I grew up in a neighborhood where I could walk behind, in the backyards of 4 or 5 different houses and be at a baseball game, with 5 people playing baseball, but still, it's fun. And you didn't get that, so that's too bad. But I don't know. I hope you can turn loose, because I think it's important for kids to go out and play baseball and argue with each other without a grown-up telling them which one, who's right, and the rules of this. Well, no, they're not. One of you is 5 and one of you is 12, and you're making up your own rules. You're arguing about it. That's a big part of being a kid, I think. So I hope he can get that.
Well, I'll do my level best to not pay too much attention to him, I guess.
Don't forget to change the diapers.
I would be remiss if I didn't say on this Father's Day episode, Happy Father's Day to you. I know that Hallmark holidays are very, very important to you.
That's absolutely
just crushing if you don't get a card and that kind of thing. But don't worry, it's in the mail.
Okay.
And yeah, thanks for talking through this stuff. We get a lot of questions on High Side Low Side about parenting and interacting with your family, and how to sort of navigate this aspect of motorcycling whereby you balance ambition and fun in your life with the risk of riding on 2 wheels. And I think some fellas such as yourself, coming up on 60 years in, it's good to get your perspective. I like it. That's it. We can call it there.
All right. Well, maybe we'll talk
get back
again
to the rest of your day. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. If you're willing to be on my podcast, then we can talk again. But if not, I'm not sure that I'll be able to make time for it, obviously. Unless it's Father's Day.
I just want to meet Spurgeon's dad. That's all. I'm a little disappointed he wasn't on the show. So
that would really be the inmates in charge of the asylum. Would be like you and Spurge Senior talking about whatever you want to talk about. Talking
about the terrible mistake we made having children.
Yeah. Exactly. I thought for sure when I asked you what advice you were gonna give to people, you would say, just don't have kids. Just don't have kids.
I think that was my advice to you all through your childhood. Never have kids.
Sure, yeah. And here we are. But
I don't have a kid anymore.
That's true.
Right.
I guess if you parent well enough and long enough, then you no longer have to parent anymore.
Right. Child is the father to the man.
Right.
Well, that was telling. I can't imagine how different this podcast would be if you would have gotten into ballet and Civil War reenactment instead of motorcycling.
Especially those things together, I think we can agree, that would be quite like, what are your hobbies? Well, here's one and here's the other one. My dad likes to speak in theory and in analogies, as you can tell.
It was kind of like listening at times to like a wise professor. He had kind of like, if you would have told me that your dad was a collegiate professor, I would have believed you.
Right. Well, he's very much not that. But he is a bit of a bookworm. He probably reads as much as professors do. Anyway, I'm glad you got a kick out of it. I think as you maybe found with your discussion with your dad, it went different direction than I expected, but that was kind of, I guess, in some ways kind of the point.
Yeah. And I think we can talk more about that, in a minute, maybe after we listen to my dad's, but so one of the things that surprised me was I would have not pegged your dad for, it sounds like part of his influence in getting into motorcycles was kind of a bit of the Hell's Angels.
Yeah.
And I did not expect that turn, that twist. Did you know that about your dad?
No, I don't think I'm not sure I've ever heard a question or a story about a Hell's Angels poster on his bedroom wall. And obviously I think he brought that up more as an example of his kind of like defiance or like doing things his parents didn't like. But I knew that he was into hot rods. Like he loved hot rod magazines as a kid, and he loved reading about, the latest kind of whatever Deuce Coupe or hot rod that someone in Southern California had built and drag raced and how much horsepower it had. And, that kind of like culture of, I don't know, slick back hair and burnt rubber and that kind of thing. So it doesn't surprise me that he was sort of like, yeah, Hell's Angels, that's what I want to do. Even though that's not
and then he rode around on his scooter.
Yeah, exactly. Even though that's not his personality at all. But I think you can't blame a kid in this, he was in 1960, he was 6. He was born in late 53. So, you can't blame a kid growing up in the 60s to be like, just think that like Harley Davidsons were the coolest thing ever, and then sort of like eventually think that, Triumphs and Nortons and then Hondas and Kawasaki's were cool. I don't know.
Were you surprised to find out, like, it sounds like he got you that little Suzuki when you were about 8 years old, but it sounds like, he had made a statement about like, oh, kids should be riding bicycles. Yeah. You shouldn't start them on motorcycles young. And I always was like, compared to me kind of starting on my own, as we'll discuss a little bit here, but like your dad, I was like, wow, Zach, you started at 8 years old. Like, that's so cool. And your dad was like, oh, it was way too early. Should have never started you there. Do you think it was because you were just bad at it? Or do you think that there was another reason where he's maybe going back and saying he should have waited to start you on a motorcycle?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what I took from it, I didn't know that was such a conscious thing that he did. That was such a clear decision that he made that a child should not have a motorcycle too early. Like, oh, he should really ride around on a bicycle first, and then only then he can have an engine powering him. That never came up. I don't think I've ever heard him say that.
But he did talk about like not wanting to influence you, and he didn't want to push.
Yeah.
I was making the joke about the ballet and stuff, but it was like he seemed pretty accepting of like whatever path you wanted to choose for yourself.
Yeah.
He didn't seem like he was trying to steer you into it, but he did bring a motorcycle home.
Yeah. And I actually remember him saying that even as I was a teenager, and I was like already into motorcycles and I really wanted to race motorcycles. And I remember him saying, you don't have like, we can do whatever you want to do. If you're interested in other stuff, like you tried playing the saxophone and you didn't like that, and that's okay. But if you want to try something else, we can do that. What do you want to do? It's okay. And to his point, it was always just kind of like the exposure to motorcycles was always end up turning into the thing that I wanted to do. But it is interesting though. Like, I think, like you said, you're sort of like, well, I had to go and buy my own motorcycle because my dad didn't really provide me with that. And whereas some people might look at my story and be like, wow, he held off until 8 years old and didn't just put him on a bike at 3, I thought that was interesting.
And the other thing that I kind of took away from this too was your dad talked about how you were doing wheelies and stoppies and it was sensible, right?
Right.
And I think I think that ties into the respect that he had for you, and he understood that you kind of knew your limits and knew your control. But yet, while he didn't have a problem with that, and he didn't have a problem with the racetrack, his biggest fear for you was riding a motorcycle in Boston.
In a city, right.
Did you know that? Or was that something that was a bit of a surprise for you?
I think, I don't know if I sensed it in the moment. I think looking back, I can remember conversations that we had. And now that I reflect on those conversations, I think, oh yeah, he was worried, like he was worried about my ability to survive in a city, not even just on a motorcycle, but just sort of like, like I grew up in a town of 1,000 people in the middle of nowhere, no chain stores, no traffic lights, no like everyone knew each other kind of thing. You know what I mean? Like it just turning at, 17 years old, and he was sort of like, all right, off you go. Good luck. Like you have to, as a parent, you have to be concerned about your kid being like, whatever, mugged on a subway or hit by a city bus or like whatever. Right. I mean, it's a much more kind of tumultuous and intense environment to be in a city than it is to be in the country. So I think that the motorcycling probably exacerbated that, or like, the motorcycling concern that he has was emblematic of all his concern. And yeah, I mean, I was riding around on a 450 Supermoto in Boston at whatever, 17, 18 years old. And like, I can see him being concerned about that because I didn't really understand that someone might be talking on a cell phone and not paying attention to me, or they might be drunk and run a red light. And I'm not expecting that, like, I think that that's pretty fair. And like he said, that my fluency in controlling a machine was never really the problem. It was sort of like the self-awareness, which I think is the struggle with all teenagers in controlling vehicles, frankly, is sort of like.
Well, I think even as I got into the conversation with my dad, there was probably a little bit more fear with some of the outside world than I probably realized when I was growing up.
Yeah.
And we're gonna pivot to my dad's conversation here in a second. But before we jump into the Motul ad, which I know we have to get to, final question for you as it relates to the conversation you had with your dad. Part of what we were trying to do was, get a little bit of an insight into fatherhood ourselves.
Yes.
And you've been a father for almost 2 years now. Was there anything that your dad said to you that struck you in a way that is going to maybe change your perspective or maybe just shift a bit of a mindset as to how you are interacting?
Interesting. I don't know. I think I have always seen my dad and both my parents, frankly, as sort of, they always just said, we didn't really have you weren't the center of our universe, really. Like we had a kid, and then we were sort of like, yeah, we're just going to bring the kid and do stuff with a kid now and live our lives. We're determined to be the people that we have always wanted to be, but have a kid and not shift our entire focus to having a child. And I think I always saw them as just sort of like freewheeling parents who were kind of like, whatever, everything, it doesn't. But to hear him say that he was determined not to drive my destiny in one way, and he was determined to support what I chose as a pastime or a passion, makes me realize that a lot of the apparent relaxation and sort of like confident attitude he had in parenting wasn't confident. It was premeditated. It was sort of like, I need to be relaxed in this moment. I need him to make this decision himself. It wasn't him saying like, I don't care what you do. And those are two very different things. And I think that that's something that is good, I think, for me to reflect on, because it's very hard as a parent to not follow your instincts. Sometimes you need to tell yourself that it's better for the child to do it this other way rather than react in the way that you think you should as a human being. So I think that was my big takeaway, is that there was more of it it was more thoughtful. I think it was more thoughtful parenting than it maybe felt like in the moment, or than I appreciated it to be when I was a kid. And now that I have a kid, I can see that. So
yeah, no, there was definitely some moments during my conversation with my dad where I felt something very similar, and we'll get into that here shortly. It was great getting to hear your conversation with Tim, and it sounds like he is more of a fan of the podcast than I might have guessed.
True.
It sounds like he had some familiar moments that he referenced and talked about, potentially. Maybe one of these episodes we'll just put Spurgeon Sr. and Tim together and let them go crazy for an episode. See. But more on that later. Let's get into a word from our sponsor, Motul, and then we'll come back with a chat with my dad.
Okie doke. We are back with the Father's Day special, and the next interview, predictably, is a battle of the Spurgeons.
Spurgeon Sr. Joined me. We actually took a road trip down in Philadelphia. I think the hardest part of our interview was for the entire hour drive down. He was like, let's talk about motorcycles. I was like, shut up. I was like, save it for the podcast. So it was more about trying to get him to not talk leading up to it.
Because you guys were in the same room for this pre-recording, whereas my dad and I had to do it virtually. I forgot about it. That's another distinction we should add.
Yeah. We should have done if Chase would have been smart was to just put cameras in my Toyota Tacoma. We could just record the conversation as we were driving down the turnpike. So my dad and I, I'll just start off by saying, we kicked off the conversation. My dad refers to a farm. This was my great-grandfather's property. It was a property that he grew up on. And when I was born, I had an opportunity. When we moved out there, I was in 4th grade. I actually grew up on the same property. So as he's referring to the farm, as the conversation starts, he's talking about a piece of land that my great-grandfather had, and I got to enjoy it as well. So I guess just from an icebreaker standpoint, for the audience that might not know you, born in 1955,
That's correct.
first motorcycle. And how old were you?
Does a mini bike count? as a
Sure,
first
there you go.
motorcycle?
Yeah.
Okay. I was 3 when I got the Buckaroo, which
Yep.
was a go-kart.
Yep.
And then my sister got the mini bike, which was unique because it had a sidecar on it.
Yep.
So I was maybe 7 or 8, and I enjoyed that more than I enjoyed the go-kart.
When you came home at 20 with a motorcycle, or did you come home with a motorcycle? Did you go to your parents and say, this is what I'm going to do? Did you just bring a motorcycle home? Like, talk a little bit about what was the influence, if not parental? How did you get interested in motorcycles?
Okay.
And then how did you bring one home?
Okay. I would say the biggest reason I got interested in motorcycles was the TV show Then Came Bronson.
Okay.
You could take off, you could travel around the country, you could meet people, and
give the audience a 15-second synopsis of what is Then Cam Bronson. And I only
Okay.
know it because I've watched it with you.
okay, it's a TV show about a guy who lives in San Francisco. His best friend commits suicide. He inherits his bike, and he says, I'm gonna throw it all to the wind, take the bike, and just go with no plan.
Yeah.
And it's hard to remember, but you were in the middle of the Vietnam crisis. It was a lot of drama, no matter where you went. If you went to school, there was drama. You had the assassinations in '68. It was just, it was like black and white. There were some great times and there were some really awful times. So anyway, you see Then Came Bronson, and he basically takes off on the motorcycle, and it's just about traveling around the country, meeting people. And that was kind of my interest in motorcycles, because there was no drama short of learning how to drive and getting on and driving. And you were kind of leaving your problems behind. You were just saying, I'm not going to deal with it anymore.
Yeah. The
And
freedom of the road.
Yeah, more so than anything. Like I said, I had the bike delivered out to the farm in Bronxville, kept it in a garage.
But you just went out and bought a motorcycle.
Just wanted to save my money.
You had been influenced by a TV show, and then you went
Right.
out and you didn't talk to your parents or anything about this.
No.
Okay.
Tried to buy a couple other motorcycles before I settled on the one I had. And the one I had was bought from a Suzuki dealership that was started in a barn. Two brothers. One did the sales in the shop, and the other raced on weekends.
So
and
your love of Suzuki goes
Way back.
It's not just a V-Strom.
No,
Your
no.
love of Suzuki starts in the early days. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So bought the bike, took it out to the farm, learned to ride it, came home.
On the bike?
On the bike. Came in the kitchen of not the farm, but where
Your parents'
my
house.
parents lived. Told mom. Mom was kind of, oh, well, you go tell your father. My dad would come home at supper time, and he was in the dressing room taking his shirt off after work. And I said, I have something to tell you. And he said, what is it? And I said, Mom says, I have to tell you, I bought a motorcycle. And I can remember he took his glasses and he threw them across the room, and he said, And that was the end of the conversation. That was the end. I knew when I got that, I was expected to walk away. And I did. And that's all it was ever,
Did he ever express any kind of an interest in it at all?
None.
And it was never anything that he wanted to talk about?
Nope. No, this was strictly my ball of wax. So, but I can picture him throwing his glasses across the room.
Well, it's funny. I mean, you remember the things. I remember I came home with the Bonneville. I think our story is probably a little bit different in the fact that you and I were probably at our least compatible, right? I think there was a period in college where you and I were not seeing eye to eye. There was a period in college where I think oldest son grows up, butts head against father, tails oldest time.
Right.
But we weren't talking. And despite all the going to motorcycle shops and stuff as a kid together, it was like, you can't have a motorcycle of your own. And I think about just coming in that day.
Well, you were in college. And the idea was once you got out of college, you could do whatever you wanted.
Right. But I think that for us, we grew up where you were taking us to motorcycle shops on the weekends. And I think for us, for me specifically, I'm not going to speak for my brothers, but it was like, what did you expect? That's a good question. What did you expect? Like when you, like we grew up with motorcycle magazines in the house. We grew up with like Saturdays spent at, Blackman's or Hermes or whatnot. What were you thinking from a parental standpoint that we would not be interested
Right.
in pursuing that?
Well, you're always looking for things to do with your kids. Motorcycles are kind of a guy thing. Not so much anymore, but at that time they were. And I was looking for something to do that didn't cost a lot. It was free, really. You could go in a motorcycle shop.
Dealerships love that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you could
Just bring a bunch of kids in and have them sit on motorcycles.
Right. But the motorcycles were at that time, they were not just black items. They were colorful. We talk about the Ducati Paul Smart, with the green blue frame on it. And you would talk about things, and it was something to do.
Yeah.
It was something to do. And I kind of figured at some point one of you guys would be interested in it.
Were
But
you surprised that it was just me? Were you surprised that Jimmy and Josh never kind of went after it?
a little. There was a point where I thought Josh was all sports.
Yeah.
But there was a point where I thought Jimmy would start to get involved, but it just didn't work out that way. Yeah. So I think he saw how awful you got for a while. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
I think, it's interesting. So we definitely were butting heads. And I think for me, it was always just kind of like an expectation of like, I started getting more interested in it, as I got into college and really was making a little bit of my own money and started saying, hey, this is something that I want to do. And, there was well, you're not going to do it under my roof kind of a mentality. But then, I came home one day and I said, well, listen, we've been fighting, we've been, at odds a little bit. And I had moved out. I was living up in Topton, and I said, I'm going to take my MSF program, right? Like, it sounds like you didn't have something like that. You just went out and taught yourself how to ride a motorcycle.
Right. And then you would go take the test
at a state trooper's office, right?
No, you would borrow somebody's motorcycle that was really tiny, and you
then
would
do
go
it
to the test.
You have a 100cc motorcycle that I could learn on.
As a matter of fact, I did.
I did go and take an MSF program, which they give you a tiny little motorcycle.
Right.
I am curious because I don't think we've ever talked about this. I think this is something that, I went and I said, I'm going to do this. And, you said, okay. I remember taking the course and I had seen you at one point. You'd come down and you were sitting in the parking lot and you were watching. At that point, what is going through your head?
Well, I think you're going to find this out in a couple of years. If you make things too easy for your children, that doesn't always turn out well. And my thinking was, as any parent in a situation where, I think of my grandparents when my dad went in the service during World War II. He was an only child, and it's mixed emotions. It's, I'm proud he's stepping up for his country, but he's the only son I have, It's the same thing. It's, I'm proud that he's doing something that I like, but if I make it too easy, if I just say, yeah, go out and do it, go out and just go, it doesn't always work out well.
Yeah.
If you don't have to struggle at something, and in the case of motorcycling, you took your test, which was a good first step. You bought a helmet, which was a good first step. We talked about always wearing gloves and a helmet, and not exactly all the gear all the time, but it's a balancing act as a parent. I wanted you to enjoy it the way I enjoyed it. I knew there was a level of danger involved with it. I'm in between you and your mother, who is saying, "Oh no, he's gonna die."
She knew that I wasn't exactly a
acrobat.
I'm trying to think. I'm trying to think how to put this. I wasn't
coordinated.
I wasn't coordinated much as a youth, so I can understand. I can understand that aspect of it.
No, but I wanted you to enjoy it, but at the same point, I'm being a parent, and I'm saying you got to be careful.
Looking back, hindsight's always 20/20 because I'll have conversations with mom now, and she's like, "Oh, I wish that." Looking at how you've enjoyed, dirt bikes and things, I wish that we would have allowed you to have a dirt bike as a kid.
Mm-hmm.
But at the time, whether it was, financial or safety, we had 40 acres and, I remember asking for dirt bikes. It's like, no, you can't have a dirt bike. But now in hindsight, it's like, oh, it would have been nice to have that. But I think there is another aspect of, if you want to go do this when you're older and you can afford it and you can show me that you want to do it, then you can go do it, versus, oh, I'll help you do this. And then there's almost some kind of a shared responsibility should something go wrong.
Right. You grow into the responsibility of riding a motorcycle.
Yeah.
You know, it can't just be, here's a motorcycle, go ride it.
Yeah.
Because good things don't come from that.
Yeah.
But if it's, well, when you're older, when you understand some of the bad things that are out there.
Yeah.
And that's another problem too. You know, there's a lot of good out there. There's a lot of bad. I guess I'm quoting Cat Stevens now. But as a kid, everything's good. You know,
Yeah.
I have a motorcycle. I can go where I want. As an adult, you realize that there are some problems out there and you've got to be more careful. So you've got to be old enough to be responsible enough to drive. And I think that's what it came down to with me.
Yeah.
Sure. Do I want you to enjoy it the way I did? You betcha. Do I want to get to share the motorcycle? You betcha.
Well, that's another story for another day. But yeah, I would for the audience listening, I would, on the days that I would have to go to college, because there was a period where after I bought the bike did live in your garage.
Right.
And I would come home from class on the days that I didn't take the bike to class, and the bike would be gone. And you would leave work early to come home and take the motorcycle out.
I'll ride around the block.
Yeah, you'd be gone for hours. So I want to pause for a second, because that gets us into the second part of this conversation. But I want to back up because you mentioned mom. So we talked about the reaction of introducing a motorcycle to your father. We talked about your grandfather's influence on you, and honestly, your grandfather's influence on even me, because I grew up with the go-karts and I grew up with the mini bike and trying to learn how to work on them, and that kind of getting them to work again after they'd been sitting in disrepair. And I think for me, the influence of your grandfather on me, of you, of Uncle Bob on me. Let's talk about mom for a second. So you've introduced the motorcycle to your father. Fast forward a couple years, you no longer have the Suzuki. You have a
Yamaha
XS 750,
750.
which is the triple. So you have that. You're working at where you met mom? Where were you working at?
No. I had the Suzuki when I met mom.
Oh, okay. So
When
you
we
saw
were
the Suzuki
yeah.
the first time. Okay.
Yep.
We won't get into the fact that you and mom broke up. You were engaged to another woman, and then you came back around, because that was,
Life
from what I
is not
understand, that
simple.
was mom's doing. So I'll bring her onto the podcast. We can have a relationship podcast at some point with her. But you met mom while working
At the Phoebe Devitt nursing home.
Okay.
And
And
we
you
were
were
both scrubbing floors.
Okay, so you were working as a janitor at a nursing home, and walk us through how you and mom rode a motorcycle for the first time, and how you introduced a motorcycle to my grandparents, to her parents.
So you know the story.
A little bit, yeah.
So
I'm teeing you up for you to
I
take
got
this
you.
one
I
home.
got
Yeah.
you. So I would take the motorcycle to work every day.
And what did you look like at this point in time?
I had long hair. I could tie it back. I had an earring, and I weighed about 160 pounds.
And this is in 1975. Okay.
Right. We were at work one day, and she was waiting for a ride home, and she had been waiting for a while.
And you guys weren't dating at this point.
And I said, "Do you need a ride home?" And she said, "Well, I should wait." I said, "Well, I have the motorcycle." I said, "I'd be glad to take you home. Are you allowed to ride a motorcycle?" Now I'm 20, and she says, "I'm 21. I can do whatever I want." Okay. So she got on, gave her a helmet, drove her home, and we pulled up to your grandparents' house, and all of her brothers and her father were out on the porch painting the porch. And it was a surreal moment, because everybody had crew cuts and real short hair. Your grandfather had a cigar in his mouth. And I pulled up, and every head went. And she got off, and she went inside, and I left. I went, I don't know where I went, someplace. Then the next day I said, "Do you need a ride home again today?" And she said, "My mother says I'm not allowed to ride a motorcycle." So,
And one of those brothers is Uncle Bob.
Is Uncle
who we've
Bob,
talked a lot
that's
about on
right.
the podcast. Uncle Bob is mom's youngest
brother.
sibling.
Yeah. It didn't stop us from riding that summer, but we kept it on the QT. So
Kept it a secret.
kept it a secret. Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting dichotomy when you think about, you know, the parental aspect of it still being an influence, especially when it comes to motorcycling. You know, you were 20 and your dad had a pretty adverse reaction to it. Your mom or mom's dad, you know, she was 21 and he had a pretty adverse reaction to it. It sounds like Uncle Bob took a bit of a different approach to it. He kind of warmed up to you, and maybe motorcycling in that way. Do you think, as you and mom having that as a foundational element, like how did that affect where motorcycling played as you began to have a family? At what point did motorcycling become something that maybe wasn't going to be part of the story for a while?
Well, when you came along, you spoiled the whole thing.
Right, but it's not just my fault. But
No,
I mean, because like there are pictures of me sitting on the XS 750. So it wasn't until a little bit later
Right.
that you got rid of the bike.
Right. But, well, because, you know, your first child is born, and then you start.
And it's so wonderful. You think, how can we do this
Oh, my.
ever again? And then,
But you start to think, you know, I have to be more responsible.
so you're admitting you were irresponsible at some point in life.
No, but I'm more responsible for more people now.
Yeah.
So at some point, Mom and I had a talk, and you know, it was the typical, well, maybe someday again you can get another motorcycle. But
Was
for
it
now,
was it financially based? Was
No.
it like we need the money?
No.
Okay.
No. It was just about being responsible. You know, Dad had died. I had the business to take care of.
Your dad.
My dad. My grandfather was still alive, but he was in close to his 80s, so there was going to be some responsibility there. It was just time.
Yeah.
It was time.
Like, was it hard at all to say, I'm like, it had been a part of your life at that point for almost 10 years.
Right.
You know, 75 was the first official motorcycle, 85, 86, maybe 87. when you got rid
Well,
of
there
it?
was a period in there originally when I had the Suzuki in 75. I had that for about a year and a half, maybe two. And then when I started working in Dad's business, the deal was, because he didn't like it, the deal was, I'll buy a van for the business and you can drive that. It'll be half yours and half the business, but you have to use the motorcycle for the down payment. And I didn't have any other car. So no, I did, but it wasn't
You really
much
wanted
of
a van.
car. Well,
You're playing I mean, nothing screams incentivizing a child to get rid of a motorcycle like a cargo van.
there you go. But that was the deal. You know,
Was that partially because you were also playing in bands and stuff at the time and you wanted the van for
bit.
that?
Yeah, a little bit. But it was just a matter of having something to drive other than the motorcycle.
Okay.
Dad died in 77, and then in 78, I
Is when you had the
bought
XS.
this. Yeah, right.
Okay.
So because I needed something to do, I had nothing to do after work. So
Well, I think that's often where it starts. It starts as, I think we forget sometimes that with motorcycling, it's something to do. It's something to spend your time on. It's not like, oh, well, this bike is 125 horsepower. We get caught up in that sometimes when we're talking about motorcycles, but it's about how it looks and it's about just having something to bob around.
Sure. And with me, you know, it would be something to do. You know, you'd work until 5, 6 o'clock at night, and then you go home and have something to eat. 2 or 3 nights a week, you went back to work for an hour or two, and then you get out and it's 9 o'clock. What do you do?
Yeah.
So you go for a ride.
Yeah.
And it wasn't a matter of being the fastest guy on the block. That never got to me. It was just a matter of being able to go out and, you know, I'd go up 7th Street, get on the mountain road up by Blue Mountain, take that across to 309, maybe stop for a Coke someplace, and then drive home. It was just something to do.
When you decided to hang it up, your focus was other places. Jimmy had just been born, so you had three kids at home. There was no part of you that missed having that as some kind of a release or something.
Well, I think you always miss it, and that was one of the reasons for just going around and looking at motorcycles on a Saturday afternoon. You know, we have a picture at home someplace where we're down at New Hope. Mom wanted to go, and the three of us are standing in front of an old Goldwing because it was like, oh, there's a motorcycle.
We went down in the minivan. We went down in the 87 Dodge Caravan, and we looked around, and it was a motorcycle show or something at New Hope, and we walked around, and So I mean, it was always part of our childhood.
It was always an interest, you know.
So back around to I come home, and now it's full circle. Now I'm 20, and I didn't even realize this. I didn't realize that you were 20 when
Right.
you first started to ride, but it seems almost, as we're having this conversation, that there were parallels. I came home and I said, I'm going to take my MSF course. And you said, okay. I come into the front door, and then you were working down in the front room in Bridingsville, and you were on your computer, and I just set the key down. And I remember this because you didn't say a word. You just said, where is it? And you walked outside and you got on the bike and you rode away. And I had two things running through my head at this point in time.
You son of a.
No, like part of it was like, oh, it's cool. He must like it. And the other part of me was, oh my God, can you return a motorcycle? Like I thought, I was like, what have I done? You're going to just take it back and return it and be like, my son can't have this, take it back. What was that experience like for you, where you see your oldest son comes in, he hands keys down, you look at the keys, you see the Triumph logo, you know what it is. What is your point of view in this situation?
Well, my point of view was I made it a little difficult for you to get to that point, but you wanted to do it badly enough that you did it responsibly. You bought the helmet, you bought the gloves, you bought a jacket. That was an awesome jacket. and you bought the bike. I mean, you worked your way through college.
Well, I remember the guy goes, when I went to buy the bike, I applied for financing, and the guy goes, well, don't worry. If you don't get approved on your own, your dad can always come in and co-sign with you. And I just laughed. I was like, you don't know my father, because you would have never
Right.
co-signed for a loan for a motorcycle.
Right. Parents set up hurdles. And when your son or your daughter goes over a hurdle and over another hurdle and over another hurdle, at some point they're adults. And you think they've made the right choices. And, you know, from there on in, it's up to God. It's not up to me anymore. So.
And you got to ride a motorcycle.
Yeah, that was cool.
So it was funny because the rule about, as long as you're living under my roof, you can't have a motorcycle here, changed pretty quickly when I put a motorcycle under your garage roof. And it was only, I bought my bike, it would have been April, May of 2005, 2005, not 2025. That's the future. 6 months later, you came home and I drove you to pick it up. You bought a Suzuki V-Strom, but you bought it on Halloween Day. And I remember that because that
wasn't a good move.
It was Halloween Day is my mother's birthday. And you came home with a motorcycle and my mom goes, well, what did you get for me? And you kind of deer in the headlight said,
got her a helmet.
I bought you a no, you didn't even buy, you said I bought you a motorcycle. And she walked away. She wasn't happy with that answer. But it wasn't long before I brought the Triumph home and then you ended up buying a motorcycle.
Everybody was either almost through school or out of school. So I figured, what the heck?
Yeah.
What the heck? And mom never really, other than the fact that I did it on her birthday.
And you didn't buy her a present. And you kind of forgot it was her birthday.
No,
you bought her a present after the fact. Yeah.
But
because you felt guilty.
Yeah. Talk about how things have changed. I can remember we used to drive by Martin Motorsports down on Route 100 to take your brother Jim to, what was the name of the college? Westchester.
And that was back when Martin was at the old location.
Right.
Yeah.
And then I'd stop and look on the way back. I'd take him down, drop him off, stop and look on the way back. And they had this black V-Strom there. And it was there for a long time. And finally I went in on a Saturday and I said, I'm interested in buying that. Okay. The guy said, let me run your credit report. And because of business, my credit report looks like a phone book.
Oh.
So
this is the way you tell our audience that I got no inheritance because you've
it's all gone.
Squandered our credit away.
I can hear the printer going in the background because they're printing out my credit report. I can hear it going ka-chung, ka-chung, ka-chung.
The old dot matrix style.
Now it's like, yeah, probably. Now it's like 4 o'clock and the guy says, I don't know how we're going to do this. He said, you're going to have to come back next week. I said, I'm here today. I think I can get away with this today. So he says, I don't know what we're going to do. I said, can I put it on a credit card? And he said, yeah, sure. And I think I put the whole motorcycle on a credit card, which was maybe $10,000.
Yeah.
Today, you can't do that. Today, they'll go to a max of $2,500.
Or they want to add 3% back on.
Exactly. So things have changed.
So you end up with a motorcycle. I end up with a motorcycle. We've had a lot of trips together over the years. The first trip we took was because I had a buddy, Ben,
who squirreled out
on me. We were supposed to go
Ben Czar.
If you're listening
Ben Czar, you squirreled out.
So we were supposed to go on a motorcycle trip, Ben and I, and he backed out like the day before. And I remember coming into the office, I was like, I'm bummed. I was supposed to go on this. We were
How
supposed to.
long was that trip supposed to be? Because you were going to Michigan, I think, if I
Yeah,
remember
he had a
right.
wedding that he was going to, and his first wife was like, "No, you can't do this." We were supposed to go out to like somewhere south of Chicago, and then like I was going to come back through Michigan, and it was going to be a week-long trip. And I remember coming into your office and saying, I'm bummed. I was supposed to go do this trip, and Ben canceled on me, and now I'm probably just not going to go. You said, all right, well, we'll go together, but we're going to go somewhere else. And
Did I say it right away?
yeah, it was
I
no, there was
I didn't talk to your mom first?
no, you didn't talk to your mom first. There's a pattern here. You bought a motorcycle on her birthday, didn't ask her about what she wanted for her birthday. You
That's why I'm
up,
always
and,
in
up
trouble.
and left, and this is why I get in trouble, because I go and do things without asking Nicole first, because you were a bad influence on me. So Nicole, if you're listening to this at home, the reison I'm a horrible
It's
husband
my fault.
is because of my dad's influence. But we went down to Skyline Drive, and you stopped what you were doing, and you said, hey, I'm going to take you down to Virginia. We're going to go on this road trip. I went out to Cabela's the same day and bought a little 2-person tent. And the lesson that I learned there was that a 2-person tent is
Isn't
not really big
for
enough
two people.
for 2 full-grown men. But we each had, you had like an old military surplus sleeping bag. I had a ground blanket that I bought at Cabela's for like $40. We had a tent, and then we just hopped on the bikes and we just left on this trip. And I had an Atlas, and that was how we navigated into Front Royal. But that's a place that holds a lot of special memories for you, because you would take trips to Front Royal, but you really introduced me to that.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice place to go from here, because it's far enough away that it's a trip.
Yeah.
It's not just going up over the mountain and you're there. And when you get there, the best thing to do is to drive Skyline Drive. I mean, it's great. We've been there a couple times, so I get them mixed up, but I remember that night because we got there too late. The gates were closed, and we just drove around them. And I think we stopped at Joe Bat's Arm, and that's where we put the tent up in the dark.
It was a campsite. We didn't have dinner. We had crackers. We had a couple packs of peanut butter crackers and some water. We ate the crackers, and then we went to sleep.
Right.
We had like a flashlight, and we put the tent up in the dark.
And then we got up the next day, and I said, I am not doing this again. And
No, that was when you learned that you didn't want to camp anymore, and I got to stay in luxury hotels because you had a better credit card than I had.
And there's another memory. We'd driven part of the drive, and we stopped at Skytop,
Whatever the lodge was. Yeah.
And I went in to get a room, and it started to pour. Oh my gosh, the rain! It was like a flash thunderstorm. And I looked out the window, the front window of the building, and you were coming, gear on both arms from both bikes, big smile on your face. It was like,
it was such a simple time. We didn't have rain gear,
and
we didn't have any of that.
Therein lies, to me, what makes motorcycling wonderful. It's a simplicity. I mean, you can make it complicated. You can spend thousands of dollars, but in my life, it was just you throw a sleeping bag on. I told you the story. I had taken a trip. I was going to go around the Great Lakes, and I left here, and it was hot. It was so hot here. It was like the end of August. Mom was leaving for Newfoundland.
My mom taught. She took a job teaching art in Newfoundland, so that was where that comment.
Right.
Yeah.
So I left here. I figure I'm going to drive straight up, get to Niagara Falls, go across the border in Niagara Falls, and get into Canada and find a place to stay. So from here to the top of New York, it rained and rained and rained. And I had a sleeping bag. You do things because you have a picture in your mind.
Yeah.
I had a sleeping bag rolled up, and I had it mounted above the speedometer, and so it was right there, And I'm thinking, man, my sleeping bag's going to be soaked. So I get to the border crossing. Girl makes me take everything out of the bike. This is like midnight. I get everything out. It's all on the concrete. I said, can I go? She said, yeah, you can go. I said, so why did you stop me? Do I look suspicious? She said, no, it's just 12 o'clock at night and I have nobody to talk to. So put everything back in the bike, found a campsite, and motorcycle story. Any other sleeping bag would be dry from being in the car. My sleeping bag wasn't wet. It was, when you rolled it out, it was wet, dry, wet, dry, wet, dry. Because from driving in the rain, the front part of the bag got wet and the back part stayed dry. So where were we? How did we start this conversation?
Well, from trips
Oh,
in front row, and the simplicity of like no rain gear walking in.
Yeah, I think we might have had rain gear, but it was probably 20 years old and it smelled like cheese.
No, I don't think. I mean, I think that first trip, I just don't think we had anything. We just
Okay.
weren't. We were very underprepared, and we know that we've taken subsequent trips where you've been more prepared than I have, because we've joked about that. Where it's like, don't you work for the large online retailer, and I'm the one with the rain gear, and it's like, yeah.
But the simplicity of riding a motorcycle has always been part of the mystique to me.
Yeah.
You know, you don't have to have a whole lot of stuff. You just, in fact, you go to get away from the stuff.
Yeah.
You know, thanks to you, I use the head thing with my cell phone, and I can listen to music. And I think sometimes that's not great. That's not great. You get away from the wind in your ears, but it is the way it is. We're in a different world.
You know, thinking about whether it was,
But Skyline Drive,
Yeah.
Skyline Drive. So one of the memories, and like I said, we've been there a couple times. So the trips, I get the trips confused, but we'd gotten off the mountain and gone down into one of the towns alongside of the mountain and went to all-you-can-eat steakhouse.
Yeah, in the middle of nowhere, Virginia.
And everybody was so nice.
Yeah,
It was,
and they had corn nuggets.
yep.
It was my first time having a corn nugget. I know that this
Yep.
might seem off topic to you, but if you've never had a corn nugget before in Virginia, it's delightful.
Right. Coming back,
Yeah.
the drive was full of deer. And
Oh,
that's
yeah.
one of my memories. You have to slow down. You have to be careful. You
Was
have
there
to
anything?
pay attention.
Was there anything there? You know, again, was there anything there with the fact that like you're riding with your son? Was there anything there that was a different feeling or emotion for you that did not carry over, or that was just different for you than riding solo or riding with somebody else?
It was just fun. It was fun to share that with you.
Yeah.
You know, it was, I can't say on that trip that I was like behind you and thinking, oh, this is great. This is my son, you know.
Yeah.
But there have been times when I've been behind you and I think, man, he picks a line better than I do, better than anybody else I know,
Yeah.
you know.
It's become a staple in our relationship that, you know, I think I'm very fortunate to have, because it's something that you and I have been able to do together that, you know, even my brothers, I don't think have that specific type of thing.
Sure.
You know,
Yep.
one of the hardest memories for me, and this is kind of why I was asking that question, was, you know, I've gotten to a point where I think, you know, when you and I ride together, there's grandkids now. It's really come full circle where your grandfather got you mini bikes and got you go-karts and got you into this madness, and you inadvertently, whether you meant to or not, that influence passed on to me. A couple of years ago, we took a trip together and you crashed, and I wrote an article for Common Tread. It's out there. You know, you can, I think the article is when my dad rides off the side of a mountain. But
Parts 1 and 2.
it was the second part. That was when my dad got back on the bike. There's a two-part story. But my point in saying that was the responsibility that I felt. It was almost like this shift where I felt such a responsibility for you. I was nervous. I was, oh my God, my dad crashed. I was like, how do I get him out of this situation? And it was the first time, because at that point, we had been riding together 10 or 15 years, you know, 10 years, 12 years. It was the first time where like, I felt this shift of like, I'm responsible for you. And that was maybe the closest that I've probably come to the fatherly emotion that maybe you've had, because there were grandkids at the time. There was like, there's all, you're responsible for all these different people. And it just, I think the weight of that, it was the first time that I felt something like from a weight standpoint.
Well, it's the first time anything really bad had happened to either one of us on a motorcycle. It's the first time. I had one other accident long before that, but I walked away from it. But this
and you walked away from this, but you,
I had some broken parts.
You had some broken parts, and there was almost a sense, and correct me if I'm wrong, but like, are you going to keep doing this? I think, you know,
Well,
if
it
you're,
shakes you up.
Yeah.
Shakes you up, you know. And, you know, that was, your mother had a lot to do with that, because she said, you know, if you're going to quit, at least get back on the horse. Don't quit just because this scares you. Figure out, you know, what you did wrong, how you're going to continue. And then if you want to quit, then you quit.
Yeah.
But she was real good about that.
And luckily,
And
you
I
had
don't
a
know-
handsome, talented son
Yes, how about
to
that?
give you a motorcycle to get back onto.
There you go.
Part 2 of the story. And I remember on the trip where you crashed, being so concerned and so worried. And then even when we went out, and it was our first real big trip together since the crash, and I was very mother henny. I was like, you lead, and I'll fall behind you, and you take your time, and we'll get back out there. But then the second half of the trip, it was the flip. I was cold, I was chattering, I had to keep stopping, and you were like, "Oh, we'll stop at McDonald's. We'll get you a cup of coffee. You take your time." You rode me all the way back to the house. You made sure I was there safe. It was definitely, I think there was.
You watch out for each other.
Yeah. But I think it was, for as much as I felt the role shifted back again quite quickly.
Sure.
So I'm, from a Father's Day standpoint, I'm on the precipice of becoming
A father.
a father. I think, we talk about this all coming full circle. I think we've got, both of my brothers have 2 kids. So you've got 4 grandkids at this point in time. I've done the Stasic thing with them. I've played the fun uncle, but now I'm going to the fact where this is going to be, my first child, and I'm responsible for them in a way that I'm not responsible as an uncle. I'm going to get to walk away. So as a grandfather, as a father, as a son, you're all of these things. What is it going to be like for me, and what are my expectations? How does this all play out? Like I've had the conversations with Nikki about, we're going to get a motorcycle, or maybe I'll get a sidecar. We're going to do, I want to keep motorcycling in this in a way because it's so important to me and it's become such a big part of my life. How do you see it from a perspective where you're not the one responsible anymore? You're just the fun grandfather. Like, how does the role shift and change for you?
Well, your mom always talks about your Uncle Jim, that when he stopped smoking, everybody else had to stop smoking, So when you have a child, I hope you don't say, "I did this, it's dangerous, now you can't do it."
But that's what you did.
No, I didn't.
You said, "I am a motorcyclist," and
Yeah, but I didn't make it easy for you.
it's true. So you're saying
I
that
didn't bring a motorcycle home for you to learn to ride on. And
Yeah.
So, the responsibility is you have to take care of your own.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's a funny question. There's the age-old curse that every grandparent wishes for their child, which is, I hope your kid's just like you were.
Well, I think mom always says, I hope I live to see the day.
That's it.
So that my child can torment me as much as your child torments you as much as I tormented me.
Yep.
So, but I think it'll be interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see how.
Yep.
The,
I would say, as
the
far as
journey continues.
motorcycle is concerned, you got to be more careful. Doesn't mean you have to stop, but you have to think more about your relationship with other people, where up to this point, it's pretty much you've taken care of yourself, and that's all there's been.
Yeah.
You've just gotten married, so now you do have a responsibility for one other person, but if something happened to you, she could go and take care of herself. She's pretty sharp.
Yeah.
But a child can't. So, you got to be careful and don't make it too easy.
Don't make it too easy. So, okay, whether or not you're buying the motorcycle with the sidecar, I'm going to have to buy the motorcycle with the sidecar. Let's just imagine for a second that we have a motorcycle with a sidecar. I can take my son or daughter. We're going with the surprise. My son or daughter can come with us. You're on the Bonneville. We can take a trip together. 3 generations. Where do we go? Take your time. I know I put you on the spot here. Think about it for a minute.
Well, I like Skyline Drive. That pulls me back all the time. But where else could we? How much time do we have?
It's our imagination.
Oh, Margaritaville.
Margaritaville,
I
which
think it's not open anymore. But
you're talking about, like the Jimmy Buffett restaurant down on
the Keys.
Oh, you want to go to the Florida Keys?
Yes.
Because I mean, it's a chain now, so you have to be more specific.
Yeah, Key West.
You want to go to Key West on a motorcycle?
Because there's a lot to see between here and Key West, and you're taking a grandchild.
That's true.
You can do Disney.
So we could do Skyline Drive. I'm not going to Disney with my kid. We're not doing Disney. You never took us to Disney. You don't know the hell that I've heard. It's horror stories taking a child to Disney. We're taking the child on a motorcycle trip.
Okay.
So Key West
I
is
would
your
say
final
Key
answer.
West, yeah.
You want to go to Key West?
Yeah.
Okay. So
because
that means,
if you're taking one of Jimmy's kids, it would drive him nuts because he doesn't get to go.
I do like to torment my brother. That is true. So I think that's kind of like the future, right? Like it all comes full circle, depending on how this shakes out. You got 3 generations of Dunbars, and if nothing else, I mean, we've already got the Stay-Six.
There you
So
go.
throw a sidecar in the mix too, and then we all just take
We're
a trip
on our
somewhere
way.
down to Key West. So, well, it's fun to think about. And the reality of it is it's going to hit within about 4 weeks of this episode airing. So it'll no longer be a Father's Day episode just for you and me, but also for me becoming a father. And I think that, motorcycling has played such an impactful portion of our life together. It'll be interesting to see how it unfolds with
A new generation.
a new generation.
There you go.
So
Awesome.
Okay, there you have it, everybody. I referred to it going into that interview as the Battle of the Spurgeons, which isn't really fair. But Spurge, if it were a battle, who do you think won?
I think my dad could have fought harder. I think my dad has more on. I think he was very fair in not coming back, and I almost was hoping that there were a couple of moments where he was going to really throw a jab. There was like one little moment where he kind of talked about me being not coordinated as a child.
Well, one of my favorite things I think was near the end of that interview, which was that when you said, "Where do you want to go?" and he said Margaritaville, and you said the Jimmy Buffett restaurant, and I could tell that you had this sort of like the tone of your voice. I could tell you were sort of like you wanted to fly off the handle and be like, "Are you joking?" But then you gave him, then he was like, "No, I mean like I want to go to Key West," and you're like, "Oh, okay. Well, Key West is a pretty good destination."
Well, I was expecting I was trying to set it up with we can go we've had I think the dichotomy here, listening to your dad, you guys have had so many experiences together, and a lot of it revolves around racing. I think you've taken some trips and stuff, but there's so much racing history that you guys have. And with my dad, there was nothing ever competitive. It was always just road trips.
Right.
We would just take road trips together.
Right.
We'd meet places. We'd use motorcycles in that way. So I was expecting him to be like, let's ride across the country. Let's go west of the Mississippi. Most of our trips, I think almost all of our trips have been east of the Mississippi. So I was expecting the Rocky
Expand the
Mountains or the
horizons.
Grand Canyon. Yeah.
Instead, he was like,
And
"Let's
was
go
just
to Applebee's for that 2-1
Margaritaville.
meal." Anyway, well, yeah, but in the end, it was a very charming answer that there's a lot to see between here and Key West, and that would be a fun destination. And
Well, the joke too, and he had kind of made the reference there about, your brother would be so mad. My brother actually is a huge Jimmy Buffett fan.
I see. Okay.
My brother has always wanted to take family vacations to Key West, and has always been like, "Let's all go to Key West," and everybody's like, "No, we're not doing that." So I think part of that answer too was a little bit of ribbing, in case my brother is ever listening to the podcast.
Well, on that topic, actually, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about was this sort of the idea of quote unquote, what did you expect? I thought I really liked that aspect of your conversation with your dad, where you're sort of like, you said something like, what did you expect? And then you said, actually, hold on, that's a good question. And I'm asking it to you right now. What did you expect raising a son near a motorcycle? Didn't you expect him to be into motorcycles? But I'm curious, you have 2 brothers, right? And neither one of them are avid motorcyclists, right? Or neither one of them have their license. Is that accurate?
No, Jimmy, my youngest brother was interested for a while. He had his permit and came close, but then ended up not following through. And then Joshua has hinted around, I wouldn't mind having a little dual sport at some point in time, but so neither one of them have pursued that or followed that.
So I'm curious, and you are the eldest son, is that correct?
I am oldest of 3.
You asked your dad, what did you expect? Obviously I was going to get into motorcycles if you sort of took us to motorcycle dealerships and stuff like that, but your brothers did not really, and you did. So what do you think happened there? Why are you not a family of motorcyclists, and instead it's more of a father-son dynamic between you and your dad?
I don't know. I really don't know. I think that this is probably more of a psychology examination of me. I don't know. As the oldest, I really gravitated towards a lot of the things that my parents were interested in. With my mom, it was photography. It was cooking. With my dad, it was motorcycles and electric guitars. And I think that as the oldest, maybe it was some of the time that I had before my brothers came along, or just the fact that I was really I really kind of respected my parents and the individual hobbies that they kind of were interested in, and it just rubbed off on me. Because the same way, my grandfather, my mom's dad was really into fishing, and as a kid, like I just wanted to hang around with him and go fishing, and he taught me how to use tools, and Uncle Bob taught me how to work on cars and motorcycles. So like I looked at the people around me, and I tried to pick the things about them that I was most interested in. With my dad, motorcycles and guitars were the two things that were top of the list.
It's interesting. And I think I think my dad brought up the whole like nurture versus nature thing. The ultimate parenting question of sort of like how much of a kid's how much of a child's personality or sort of like outcome is based on the environment, and how much of it is innate.
Well, I think just to speak to that for a second, I thought it was interesting that both of our dads had a similar approach to it. Maybe they didn't, I have a similar mindset, right? Like, I don't think my dad for sure wasn't like, well, this is what I did, so we want to make sure that you do it. And it sounds like your dad was very similar. And, he made the comment at one point about like, not wanting to be one of those baseball dads, like sitting out there making sure that like you got to do it better and you got to do it my way. And, it sounds like both of our dads ultimately respected the men that we grew up to be, but at no point were trying to force their values or opinions on us.
Yeah, agreed. Well, actually, on that topic of sort of the dads and their different point of views, perhaps. I thought it was interesting. Your dad said something like, I wrote this down. He said, it can't just be, quote, here's a motorcycle, go have fun. Like he was very sort of adamant about kind of like making you work for it to some extent. Right. And I think it's interesting that you and I in many ways have kind of landed in the same place at around 40 years old. Anyway. But that's basically what I had. Like, did you like sometimes when I heard your dad talking about the way, like his philosophy with you, I kind of thought like, oh man, I don't know if I would have survived that. Like I probably would have just played the guitar, read comic books, and would have been like, I don't know, he doesn't want me to ride a motorcycle, so I'm not going to do it. And I don't know, I don't think I would have reacted the same way you did, whereas you just kind of went for it anyway. So did you have, it must have sounded easy for me, right? My dad was sort of like, yeah, I just bought you a motorcycle, and then I paid for your race entry fees, and then we like drove around and did stuff together. And like, he kind of did just give me a bike and tell me to go have fun. And I don't think that the outcome, now that we're, 30, 35 years down the road, is much different, but it was a lot different. How did you reflect on that?
Yeah, it's something where it gets back to the, what did you expect question because my dad never told us we couldn't do something, but he never just gave it to us. And I think that's what he was trying to drive at. Because it's like, this has been from the time I was a little kid up until, I'd say current day. It was always, you can do it if you want to go out and fund it. And he was always supportive. Like when we were kids, it wasn't like, if I'm 5, I didn't have to go get a job to buy a soccer ball to play soccer. Like he would take us to the YMCA and he would take us, we were in T-ball and softball, and he let us practice different activities, but it was always like we had to want to pursue it. I remember taking violin lessons, and I didn't like it and I didn't get it right away. And he goes, well, I paid for you to rent this violin, so you're going to stick with it a little bit too. There was also, if you are going to try something, you're going to follow through. Yeah. But as we got older, especially, I remember wanting a guitar, and it was like, well, I'm not going to give you a guitar, but what I will do is I have lawns that need to be mowed at my company. And if you want to come mow grass, you can earn money and you can go buy one. I remember when I decided I was going to move out to California, or when I took my first road trip, he would come and say, hey, like, good luck, have fun. I remember the one time he gave me a journal and he said, hey, make sure you take notes. And there was another time where, he let me borrow money once, with like an itemized list to pay him back. But I mean, I don't even know where I'm going with this, man. Like, it was just, he was very supportive in his own way, but and I never thought about it this way before, he absolutely never made it easy on us. You know, when I decided I was going to move out to LA, it was okay. I'm not offering you any opinion on that. I'm not saying good or
Right.
bad. It's go do it. And if you need me, call me. And that was the only time I remember calling him the one time, and I borrowed $500 because I was broke and I was eating refried beans out of a can. And I think I was like 23 years old, and I couldn't wait to pay him back because I didn't like being in debt to him. And that was this almost relationship that he kind of created, was that a sense of independence, a sense of you have to do it yourself.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think when I reflect on what my dad did with me, I think it was risky. I think that maybe he just judged it, and I was a child that worked within that routine. But I feel like he gave me a lot of leash, you know. And if a kid had to, and I'm talking about being 8 years old as well as 12 years old and 15 years old and 18 and you know, into young adulthood, my dad, you know, he did give me things, and including mutual respect, which maybe was the big piece of it. You know, like if I had not earned that, then he wouldn't have done it, you know? But it is, I do think it's fascinating that, the mantra between our dads was kind of like, the mindset seemed like it was maybe different, but ultimately, you know, they had the same goal in mind, which was to kind of support and like offer those things and know that responsibility comes with it. You know, like my dad may have made it easy on me, but I don't think that he said like that he thought that I was being thoughtless about riding a motorcycle. You know, it's sort of like, well, if you're going to have it, you need to learn how tight to tighten the spark plug, and you're going to need to learn, you know, responsibility and clean it and park it, and it's yours now. And it's sort of like whatever, like having a puppy kind of. And I think that that's maybe not something that really has, that I have specific memories of, but I'm sure that was an aspect of it.
I don't think that my childhood was barren by any means. You know, like we had, like as he was talking about the go-karts and mini bikes.
No,
like,
it sounds like it.
When
Plus
we moved
guitars
out there,
and
we
whatever.
had all that stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think where with him, a lot of it, and this is really kind of the takeaway that I gleaned that maybe I didn't respect in the past, was if he was going to give it to us, then I think there's a sense of responsibility there. There's only so many calluses on my finger I can get if he hands me a guitar and says, "Here, you know, play a guitar," or "I'm going to take your brother down to baseball practice and let him, you know, swing at a ball." I think with that, his fear always was he was going to do something where I ended up getting hurt and he was going to feel responsible for it. You know, and I noticed this a couple different times outside of motorcycling, where, you know, out of college, I took a job roofing, and he was like, "You can't do that. It's too dangerous. You're going to fall off a roof." And again, it goes back to me not being coordinated. But, you know, I said, "Well, I'm going to do this. Like, this is what I want to do." And he goes, "Okay, but just know that I don't support this."
Okay,
I think some of it really was about him saying, "Hey, you can go follow your own path, but I want you to know that this isn't what I would do." You know, and maybe there was maybe what he was trying to do there was guide a little bit. I think at that age, he was probably trying to force me to go to college. And I wasn't necessarily on that path at the time. But yeah, he just never made it. He never made it easy. And that's kind of the theme that I never really respected before that I took out of this conversation.
Right. Yeah. Well, I wrote down one of my dad's sayings that he always said to me when he was teaching me how to drive a car and he was teaching me how to ride a motorcycle. He had one of these sayings, and I feel like it applies to the sort of like tenor of the conversation with your father and my dad as well. My dad used to say, "They teach monkeys to drive the things." That was and I think this is like this is something that many parents have used probably. Maybe it's something that his dad used on him. But I remember specifically like coming to a stop sign in a car. Like he was in the passenger seat and I was driving the car, and whatever, I'm 15, 16 years old. And I would come up to the stop sign and I would say, "Which way do I go?" And he would say, "You know, they teach monkeys to drive the things." It's knowing where you're going that makes us human, that makes you good at this, you know? Just controlling the thing doesn't make you good at it. You know, just knowing how it works or knowing how to make it go or stop. You need to know where you're going. And I think that's like such a I really like that as a parenting attitude, especially when it comes to motor vehicles, because I feel like it's a good allegory for parenting and for life, right? Like you can have lots of energy and you can try to master something, but knowing what you're doing with it and knowing where you're going is what separates us from the apes, I guess.
I think if my father were here right now, he would be the first to admit that whenever we're on road trips together, he has no idea where he's going. And he's constantly, relying on me to show the path. But I think to tie that together, I think that what was really interesting is that it sounds like listening to the conversation with your father, listening to the conversation with my father, and having the conversation with my father, the sense that I got was that they trust that we currently know where we're going, that ultimately we found our way, right? And I think that you hit a bit of a nail on the head earlier, that they took two different approaches to get there. But ultimately, our parents are proud that we are on the path that we're on, and they're excited for us to now be the parents. And maybe some of that excitement is because they're no longer responsible. My dad talked a lot about, responsibility and, at a young age being responsible for taking over his father's business and taking care of his grandfather and raising three boys, and taking care of a family. And I think now maybe the dads, if you will, get to sit back and enjoy not being as responsible.
Yes, indeed. Yeah. Like you said at the end of my dad's interview there, if you parent for long enough, you're not a parent anymore. And boy, what a relief that must be. So whether or not we found our way, I'm not sure. But whether or not we're going to play the Rev Trivia engine sound guessing game now, I am quite certain that we are about to do that. There's no guest. We didn't line up a way to do this with our dad, so we're just going to do it between.
And it was so funny because we finished. My dad and I finished the conversation, and he goes, "So when do we play the engine sound guessing game?" And I was like, we're not going to do that. He's like, no. He's like, I drove all the way down here to Philadelphia. I want to play the engine sound guessing game. So maybe we'll have to do Tim versus Spurgeon Senior engine sound guessing game at some point in time, and let those two duke it out.
The hard of hearing engine sound guessing game where they both go, turn it up. I can't. Anyway. Okay. So a special shout out to the dads on this Father's Day episode. Let's listen to this engine sound and see if we can figure out what it is. I hope it's just a recording of a dad yelling at a kid, and we'll be like, I recognize that. That's a good, solid audio clip. Good.
Can I take the guess right
off? Oh, please do. Yeah.
And this is me trying to play it. Zach and I have learned that there's a psychology behind our producer Chase and the picks that he makes. I'm going to guess a Suzuki V-Strom. Original V-twin Suzuki V-Strom. So my dad referenced this in his conversation a lot, or there was like a reference there. But if you forget earlier episodes of the podcast, my dad was a huge fan of the V-Strom. That was the bike that he came home on my mother's birthday with. I don't know. It sounds like it could be a liquid cooled V-twin.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. I was going to say 270 degree parallel twin. So I'll guess V-Strom 800, but I think a V-Strom 650, or wait, are you going DL 1000? V-Strom 1000?
DL 1000.
Oh,
baby.
1000. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It sounds a little too small for that. But anyway,
the fuel pump sounds similar.
Does it? Yeah. You can hear that little zzz before it. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and flip a hint over. V-twin.
Okay.
Hint number one is V-twin.
Okay.
That could be a Suzuki V-Strom.
What other?
Maybe this is for if my dad's playing along. Did he guess his own favorite motorcycle sound?
Yeah.
What else could it be? If it was not a V-Strom, L-twin, big 90-degree V-twin.
It does.
Ducati.
No, I think it's too quiet and tame to be a Ducati. I think it's.
You want to listen one more time for the audience?
Yes, let's do that. Let's listen one more time. I'm like racking my brain for V twins, and I'm trying to like, I don't know. I don't think it's European. It sounds like a Japanese V twin to me, just because it sounds like
Honda Superhawk.
Yeah, you got a Honda Superhawk. Could be VTR 1000, like a RC51, but like it doesn't sound quite like burly enough for that. It sounds smaller than that, like more like SV650.
Suzuki TL1000 would be the same.
TL1000
would be the same engine.
Yeah, well, that's basically
That's
the same
same
engine
as
as
the
the
Yep.
V-Strom 1000, or largely. I don't know. Yeah, what other V twins are there? You already got us with the Honda Hawk, so I don't think it's that. I don't know. I don't know. Yeah.
All right. Hint number 2. 90-degree.
Yeah, we already
V-twin.
knew that. Come on.
Well, our audience might not have. They might have been sitting there thinking it was a Honda Shadow, for crying out loud.
Well, actually, the Shadow, I believe, initially
Was not a 90-degree
it
V-twin,
wasn't.
was it?
Oh no, it might have been a 45 initially, and then it went to
Yeah,
60, I
yeah.
think, or
Yeah.
no, 57, whatever, doesn't matter. 52.
I'm sticking with Suzuki.
I think-
DL1000.
I think it's a really good bet. I got to come up with something. I'm going SV650. I don't know. I don't hear
All
anything
right.
super. Let me.
The winner today is a 2020 Suzuki V-Strom XT.
So that's a
I
650.
believe that's a 10. Is that the XT is a 650?
Well, I think there's a 650 XT and a 1050 XT, isn't there?
Producer Chase. It's a 1050 according to
It's a
producer
1050.
Chase.
Okay, so I mean, I'm giving you credit for that. I'm giving you 98% credit.
98%. Now, part of this game, as we've learned, well, first of all, shout out to Raphael for sending in the audio clip of the 2020 Suzuki V-Strom XT. But part of this game, as I'm learning, is a lesson in psychology.
It is.
How is our producer Chase thinking about this? And is he trying to stump us, or is he trying to play into
Indeed.
the ethos of the
Well,
episode?
I didn't feel very strong today. I think I had an off day at the plate. I knew sort of what was going on there, but you were the man with the confidence today, and I respect that a lot.
Well, I rarely am. So, the first time for everything. If you want to play the Edge of Sound guessing game with Zach and myself, you can always send us a 30-second audio clip of your bike, have it start up, have it idle, few good revs, let it idle again, and make sure that you send it over to highside, lowside at RevZilla.com. We need the year, make, model, and any mods that you have performed to the motorcycle. And again, shout out to Raphael for allowing us to play along with his Suzuki V-Strom.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Moving on. Let's give away a t-shirt, shall we? This week, this is not a weekly show. I don't know why I said that. This bye week, this episode's winner comes from Tori Lev 1. Tori Lev 1 writes in and says, "My husband introduced me to this podcast on our frequent trips to Boston Children's Hospital. We were always anxious on these drives since we knew our baby girl would need surgery after being born. I was not super thrilled to listen to dudes talk about bikes, but I agreed since I love my husband." Very nice. "Pretty much from the moment he put it on, we were laughing at the commentary, trying to identify what bike makes that engine sound and having so much fun. It takes our minds off the unknown for a little while. Thank you for the brain break and for entertaining two anxious parents. P.S. Our baby girl had a very successful surgery and will most likely be going home today." Dynamite. You love a happy ending to a story. This is obviously a particularly heartwarming tale of people using high side, low side as its intended purpose, which is to forget about their real lives.
Yeah, this really, I think, struck a chord with Zach and I as it related to today's episode. Fathers, mothers, parents, and the next generation. And I think that it was really just a great story. I think that it's probably a common story amongst most first-time high-side, low-side listeners. They don't want to listen to us. They're being forced to by somebody else. But luckily, Tori Lev 1 came around and didn't find us too harsh on the eardrums.
Indeed. So we're very happy to hear that your family is back on track, and that the surgery was successful. And we are obviously thrilled for you. And we would like to send you some t-shirts for you and your husband, and I don't think we have one that'll fit your baby, but we'll send one for her too. Why not?
We'll send a little one.
So please do send us your mailing address and your preferred t-shirt sizes to highside@RevZilla.com, and we'll get back to you. Thank you again, Tori Lev.
All right. So the high side, low side comment to wrap this episode up comes in from Evan via an email. Says, I'm planning on buying a CRF 300L later this year as my second bike, and then a T100 as my first real street bike when I turn 18 to do some inappropriate cross-country touring. I love to hear it,
Spurgeon,
Evan. So it
Dunbar.
sounds like, Evan, you're following my footsteps. I love it. But it sounds like Evan is not a motorcyclist yet. Lastly, Evan wants to get into racing as well, MotoGP, Moto America, World Superbike, TT, etc., but doesn't know how. Recently, I watched Supermoto Cross religiously, but I don't know anything about the street portions of this. Or I already watched motocross and motocross originally, but wants to know more about the street portions. What do you recommend, Zach?
Tricky. Okay. Well, first of all, I hope that your motorcycling dream comes out the way you want to, Evan. I think that, getting a CRF 300L is a awfully good place to start if you want to get into motorcycling. Getting into racing. That's a good question. It's tough. I think it is difficult to jump into something like this where people that are in and around a sport are so knowledgeable. Like the way that people get into baseball, for example, oftentimes is by going to games with their grandfather as a kid. And it's sort of like an emotional thing. It's a day out with Pop, and you get to go to the game. And then when you're at the game, he says like, oh, you see how the left fielder moved over there and did that thing? Well, this, that, and the other thing. And your grandfather is giving you an introduction to this sport. And by the time you're old enough to go to the ballpark by yourself, you sort of understand the game a little bit. And it's hard to get into racing from that perspective by yourself, because you're going to start watching and be like, Marquez who and Yamaha what and Aprilia and KTM and I don't really understand who these people are or how it works. So it is a difficult question. I guess I would start by kind of like, going to YouTube and watching like highlights of races or something like that, and seeing which ones kind of like appeal to you the most. Like if you watch a certain race, a World Superbike race or a Moto America, British Superbike or MotoGP or something like that, and it seems especially exciting, then dig down a little bit in that one series. Like if you find a rider that you think is interesting, for example, like watch some YouTube videos of just that rider, maybe an interview with them. Then you get to know the person a little bit. And then when you're watching the race, you're like, oh, that person that I know. Because ultimately that's how fandom, I think, comes about in motorsport, with MotoGP or any motorcycle race, road racing, even in NASCAR and stuff. That's how, you're sort of like, you go for Kyle Busch because you like Kyle Busch or whatever. And then you sort of learn the series from there. So that's what I would recommend. Get to know the personalities.
And I would say, the only thing to throw in addition to that is if you're literally asking where to watch, if you go to Moto America's website, they have a whole how to watch page. Depending on where you're at in the country, there's different ways to watch the races as they are broadcast. You can do the same thing with MotoGP. You can get the MotoGP pass, and
MotoGP.com has free content as well.
Yep. So you can watch there. I think, if you had to pick the easiest 1 to a 10 for the first time, it would probably be Moto America, because Moto America is a traveling circus within the United States. Whereas with the traveling circus of MotoGP, you would have to go to Austin, and you didn't tell us exactly where you live, Evan, but very few people live down in Austin outside of, I don't know, 1.1 million people are out. I have no idea what the population of Austin is. But again, I think, not being afraid to maybe, look at the websites and see exactly how to and where to consume. And the only other thing that I'll throw out there for you, Evan, and we don't normally do this, is let's say you want to go to Moto America and you want to meet some other like-minded people to watch the race with. We will send you a high side, low side t-shirt as well. That way you can wear that. People will know that you are, wacky just like them. They'll come up, they'll talk to you, they'll become your friend, and then you'll have somebody to talk to about racing.
I love it. Okay. Wow. Look at that. It's raining t-shirts today.
shoot us an email, Evan, at highsidelowside@RevZilla.com and claim your t-shirt.
And that brings us to the end of the show, everybody. This was a particularly heartfelt one, I think. We would just remind you at this point, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below if you have a question or some sort of sinister burn about Spurgeon's shirt. Please do put that in the comments.
This is a shirt from India, baby.
I recognize it. I feel like I can smell it from here. The engine sound guessing game is provided via you, the dedicated high side, low side listener and viewer, as a reminder. So if you have a 30-second clip of your bike starting up, revving, and then shutting off that you'd like to share with us, you can send that to highsidelowside@RevZilla.com as well. And of course, we encourage you to send this podcast to your dad or a father that you know.
Yeah, I think this was a special one for Zach and I.
Indeed.
There's been a lot of people that have been asking for having our dads on the podcast for a long time. I think we talk about that quite often. It just comes up naturally in conversation, and we were trying to figure out the right way to do it. And hopefully we landed this in a way that you found it somewhat entertaining. I will say, in my final thought, we had reached out to my mom for some help sourcing photos for the YouTube version. And my mom was like, no, I wasn't asked to be on the podcast. I'll source you photos when we do the Mother's Day episode. So I think Barbara Joe is waiting for her Mother's Day invitation. So maybe next year we'll have to do a Mother's Day episode. And then Mom can tell her side of the story as to her influence on how I ended up on Two Wheels, perhaps. But
I love that. I think that's a great way to end. If you think that a Mother's Day episode's a good idea, feel free to leave that comment on YouTube or send us an email with suggestions of how to do that. But I think that's a great way to end. We'll pocket this idea. Hopefully you all liked it, and we can do it with moms next year.
See you, everybody.